Dennis Stone. Man, I am so excited for this conversation. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me on, Dave. It was nice meeting you about 5 weeks ago, and I'm really excited to be on your show today. Thank you.
Yeah, no, we met. Yeah, as Dennis was just saying, we met about 5 weeks ago, back when I was on the East Coast, and um, really, my wife and I were just in this place of like, okay, well, we've kind of saw a lot of the things we wanted to see. What's here close? And my wife was just looking on her phone as we were having breakfast, and she's like, "There's a place called America's Stonehenge just up the road." And man, my ears perked up. So, first off, um, I was a strange kid growing up, right? And right after I first got
Mhm.
married, um, I found a book by Graham Hancock called Fingerprints of the Gods,
Mhm.
which talked about diffusion and those sorts of things happening much sooner than we thought. And it sent me down this wild rabbit hole of looking at societies or civilizations that maybe aren't here any longer. And as I started to investigate that, it looked like it held water. Then I became a Mormon, and of course, now I have a real vested interest in earlier diffusion. And I had seen your site a couple of times, and when Amber said, "Gosh, we're close," I'm like, "Ooh, we got to go." And man, it did not disappoint. So, Dennis, I'm so glad that you're here to talk about it with me, and I'm so thankful you agreed to come on.
Yeah, I'm glad you had that breakfast and your wife and you happened to spot that. She spotted that. Thank her for that. That's great. And by the way,
Yeah, no,
Graham Hancock, Fingerprints of the Gods, it may have been in the 1990s, perhaps. I think it was quite a while ago. One of the first books I saw by him. Hmm.
yeah, no. I first picked up Fingerprints of the Gods '95. It was the year
Okay,
I
that
got
so.
married,
Oh,
and
okay, that
boy,
sounds all right. Yeah.
it was fascinating, and it sent me down this rabbit hole. And gosh, we start seeing sites like this pop up, and it really upsets the current narrative with archaeology in general, right? Um,
Yeah.
Archaeology, is a relatively new science. It's only been around for just over 100 years, and in that 100 years, they kind of said, "Well, we figured it all out. We know what mankind's history truly is," and that's not necessarily the case anymore, Dennis.
Right. They pretty much feel like they have written the history books, and that's it is what it is in the history book. And you have a site like ours, and there's so many others as you mentioned that don't fit in that that history that they've written. Our site is definitely well. They basically have said over the years that in the Northeast there's no ancient stone ruins, and they pretty much taught that to their students. These students, became history teachers or into archaeology or whatever, and they maintain that the Northeast doesn't have any ancient stonework or any ancient Native Americans were here for thousands of years, but they look for pottery and points, maybe a burial, maybe a habitat site, maybe a workshop where they're making tools, but nothing on the scale of like what you saw at our site. Today we know of about 800 sites from Quebec, Canada, and Ontario going down to Virginia. And these sites really are not supposed to be here according to the history books. So their answer to that is it appears that a bunch of crazy farmers built all these stone structures, walls across the landscape. And it's like crazy farmers. How many crazy farmers? They were trying to make a living. They worked very, very hard, but they wouldn't go out of the way to make things that were useless for a farm. But it's still there a little bit today. But I think some technology will help to show the truth, hopefully, different dating techniques, the astroarchaeology we've been working on since 1965. But again, these sites really shouldn't be here according to the history books and according to what we call mainstream archaeologists.
Right, absolutely. Now, real quick here, Dennis, as we dive in here, let's first, kind of establish what this site is, where it's at, where it's located here in the Northeast, because I think this is going to get people kind of maybe coming to your area a little bit here, because this is fascinating.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, we love to have the people come up and visit us. So we're located in southern New Hampshire. It's a town of North Salem, New Hampshire. There's Salem, and we're part of that, but we're actually in North Salem, New Hampshire, about 40 miles north of Boston. And we're about 15 miles from Manchester, New Hampshire, and they have a big airport. So people flying in either Logan or Manchester, they fly into. And the site is located, like I say, in the town of North Salem. It's about 106 acre site. It's on a hill, almost 350 feet above sea level. And the site has been worked on for 90 years now, archaeologically, since 1937. So it was at the beginning of the kind of the beginning of archaeology, as you mentioned. And so 90 years of research, and it continues to this day. We think it's a ceremonial site. We don't think it's a place where people live necessarily. The structures don't seem to be designed like that. You know, there's a lot of structures with a lot of stonework, and they yield, you know, smaller spaces inside, with the exception of the oracle chamber, which is quite large. I'm sure you took a look inside of that chamber. It's a pretty interesting structure. It even has like a stone bed in it, if you will. And it has 5 closets. It has a chimney flue that used to have 2 stone dampers. It has 2 carvings, one of a deer and one of an arrow. It has a bench seat carved right into the rock where 3 people could sit. And it has 2 underground man-made drains. It has a tube called the oracle tube. It runs between the chamber and what we call the sacrificial table. The tube is horizontal. And the thought today is that that structure may have been where a priest or shaman may have stayed during different ceremonies, perhaps weddings, funerals, perhaps. We just don't know. It's speculation at this point. But also astronomical alignments, whether it's a summer solstice, winter solstice, or even a cross-quarter day, like November 1st, August 1st, February 1st, that kind of thing. There's another chamber called the Chamber in Ruins. It's quite large also. And that chamber is interesting because we got 3 carbon datings from charcoal in a root that had been growing through this structure, predating the colonial period, going back as early as 4,000 years ago in the charcoal. It had 3 carvings that were found on it. They're on display in the museum. And they were found in the late 60s. They were looked at by Dr. Barry Fell from Harvard University. He came first in 1975 to visit us. And he studied not only inscriptions at our site, but right across North America and into South America. We know Native Americans left petroglyphs and beautiful pictographs, you know, the paintings, you know, particularly out in the West. We do have some in Vermont too, in Brattleboro, I believe it is, a beautiful artwork. But these seem to be a different nature. In fact, he interpreted them as Phoenician, Libyan, and Celtic Ogham or Ogham at our site. And they were found right at that chamber in ruins too, right near the entrance. And that has about a 6-ton stone slab that was a roof slab that has now fallen into the structure. And it had about 1,000-pound stone lintel that's there. And that's about the spot where the inscriptions were found, right in that area near the entrance of the structure.
Wow.
But the site has a courtyard. It has a plaza area with structures surrounding it. It has a platform you could stand on and look down at the table. The table is interesting. It's bell-shaped. It's about 4.5 tons.
You know what, Dennis? As you're talking about it here, let me pull up a picture of this table, because I think it's going to be one of those things that the viewers are going to definitely want to see.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. You know, it's worth 1,000 words. Definitely.
Yes. Give me just 1 second here. So can you see that on your side, Dennis?
Actually, it looks like it's oh, there it comes. It just came up now. Yes, it looks like it's on my side. I can see it. And
Before we start talking about the table here, let me
yeah.
ask you this question: how did they establish the date 4,000 years ago?
2 different ways. One of them was through carbon dating, and you can't really carbon date anything like rock. You can carbon date anything that was living at one time, anything organic, charcoal, bones, shells. And what we did is we carbon dated a piece of root in 1967 in the north wall of that chamber in ruins, growing through the wall. And the tree stump was there in the 1930s. Goodwin commented about the tree. They couldn't do tree ring dating. It was too rotted. But they estimated its age going back into the 1600s. This is around 1937. They were talking about that stump. 30 years later, in 1967, the stump's pretty gone, but they excavated down a group called New England Antiquities Research Association. A couple of the members, James Woodall. There was Midge Chandler. She ended up getting a master's in archaeology. She was a long-term researcher at our site, and James was too. So in 67, I got a picture of her in my book, actually, extracting that piece of root from the north wall. It was carbon dated to 1690 AD. by Geochrome Laboratories. They were located in Cambridge, Mass. At the time. They've moved, and we used them 2 years ago. We still use that same lab all those years later for another dating of some bones. So that showed that the structure was sitting there before the Paddy family, and we can talk about the Paddy family. It's also a pre-colonial date for that era, so it wasn't some crazy farmer building that, in the 1690s. The settlers hadn't quite reached this area until you get into the little into the 1700s, and below that, 1969, they continued the excavation, and they found sterile soil for a couple of inches, and they were kind of disappointed, and like, oh, we got nothing here, and they kept going down, and then they started hitting charcoal flakes, and they also started hitting some stone tools, hammer stones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers, and stone pick. These are Stone Age implements found in the mix of charcoal. And again, this soil that they were working on was a layer of stratigraphy, if you will. It has a certain color to it. It represents a certain geological time period. There's a spread of time in there. It was undisturbed right against the north wall. That means that the wall was there first. This dirt came in later. And that charcoal could have been from a man-made fire or perhaps natural, but the date on that was 3,000 years old in 1969. And they went down and they found that the bedrock right below that had been quarried. So the first thing that took place is the ancient builders removed some of the stone below this charcoal and the stone tools. They took the stone out of there and they were using it, I believe, for some of the wall materials to build some of the structures. So they quarried the slab off, and then they built a wall for the north wall of the chamber ruins. And then very slowly over time, soil starts to accumulate. It's a process of windblown particles and vegetation decay very slowly depositing the soil. And then everything after that came, so the 3,000-year-old date was after the stone was quarried and the wall was built. But in 71, they dug adjacent to that. And again, they hit a couple more flakes of charcoal, some more stone tools. They also found little spaldings. That's where somebody had been hammering these slabs, shaping them or dressing them and knocking off pieces of stone to get whatever shape they wanted. It's called percussion flaking. It's like making an arrowhead or a spear. And in any event, that charcoal was dated to 4,000 years old, plus or minus, I think, 250 years. And then we had two more 3,000-year-old dates that were found in that main site too. One of them is in 1970, and the other one, I'm trying to think of the date on the next one. So we got 3,000-year-old dates, we got 4,000-year-old date, and then the survey work on the astronomical alignments began in 1973. We cleared out the First Avenue in 1965. That was 60 years ago, with the solstice sunset. And the astronomy started then, but by the 1970s, we decided we had to hire a surveyor to get accurate measurements of these alignments, the azimuths and everything, and the distances, just to have it all surveyed. And then they could look at it. They could actually, they could have people with this data actually look at it and see what alignments we have, besides just using your eyes to watch a stone set over the sun or moon or whatever rise or set over a stone. That was a 5-year project. In 73, we hired Beverly Pearson and Associates at Derry, New Hampshire, an engineering company, and they began working in 73. And the reason it took 5 years, there was a lot of tree cutting in the 5 years, so we could open up avenues and they could survey better lines. But it was also a funding thing. We had to set aside so much money to pay for this. In fact, I was just reading one of the letters yesterday from around 1977, I think it was, 78, and they were using a theodolite up there and some other, equipment. It was running $300 an hour back in imagine what that would be today if, you inflate it. So that's one of the reasons it took 5 years. That data was compiled, sent to the Harvard-Smithsonian Institute for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for them to analyze it to see if we have any alignments. And that was the winter of 77, 78. And by the spring of 78, we got the results. And the analysis was done by a woman named Shoshana Rosenthal. She is a very interesting person. We just looked her up this year because we're doing more work in the astronomy. We have a new astronomer retired from the University of Arizona. He reached out to us and he wants to do more work on our site. So that's fantastic. So we're trying to gather all our records and all our data. And we happened to look her up, and she died in Boulder, Colorado this year, about 95 or 96 years old. But she's the one that actually worked on back in 1963 to 65 for Gerald Hopkins. He was also from Great Britain, but he lived in the States and he worked at Boston University, I believe, and also at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. And he's the one that wrote the book Stonehenge Decoded that became a top, selling hit. And it resulted in CBS in 1965 doing a special on Stonehenge called The Mysteries of Stonehenge. And I probably could, I saw it back in 65. Then we went to a library about 10 years later in Nashville, New Hampshire. We actually saw the film there. So I haven't seen it in 50 years, but what I should do is just check, maybe it's on YouTube, But Gerald Hopkins' top person on the team was Shoshana Rosenthal. And that's something I didn't realize. I read his book back 50-something years ago, and I just reread it about a year or two ago, and I'm like, oh, there's Shoshana's name right there. So she's the one that did the analysis, and she said to us, if those stone markers were used for astronomical purposes, they would work about 1800 BC, plus or minus about 200 years. That's the same as that 1971 carbon dating, about 1800 BC, plus or minus about 250 years. And she went on to mention that we had 24 star alignments, and the only star alignment we knew at the time, back in 78, let's say, was the true North Star, which is Polaris today, but 4,000 years ago, the Earth's axis was pointing at Thuban. It's a star in the constellation Draco. Draco is kind of a serpent, a dragon shape. And that comes up a little bit later in some of the more recent finds we have of serpentine walls, So that's the two ways they basically dated it. But one of the other things, the stone tools, that puts it into a Stone Age period. You don't have farmers necessarily using hammer stones, rubbing stones, stone scrapers. They're probably using metal tools in the last few hundred years. And the way the stones are shaped, actually, it was a technique called percussion flaking. That's true of the sacrificial table. That's true of the roof slabs, wall slabs, the monoliths. And by 1989, a book came out called Ancient and Modern Quarry Techniques in America's Stonehenge. And Dr. David Stewart Smith, who was with us for almost 40 years, was kind of an expert in the way stones were quarried, shaped, transported, and built into structures. He had worked for the British government for several years in the early 70s. He got his Master of Masons certificate. He was working in Scotland, and it was for what is today called English heritage. We've been over to Europe many times. You'll see Stonehenge is under English heritage and so many of the ancient, but he worked during the 70s. It was probably something called the Ancient Monument Group or whatever it was. It was a different name, but it's just saying, like, it does the same thing as English heritage. It's what it became, So David came back to the States around 78, and he was quite amazed that he came from New England, that these stone structures existed. So he worked on our site, and he started finding that these big slabs are in the stone walls. There's monoliths. There's stones that are stacked up. The big flat, they call them, they're just in layers stacked up. Some of them are stood on their end, called orthostats. Big stones stood kind of on the longitude, or the longitude axis is parallel to the Earth, and we have them in many of the stone walls, and they're also in some of the structures. He started looking at the stones very carefully, and then he told our staff around 1979, 1980, if you're out in the woods, you see a stone that's propped up, and maybe the edge of it looks serrated, and it looks artificially raised, let me know. And in 1982, Mary Kramer, one of our staff members, was having a picnic lunch out past the North Stone. And it was all just out in the middle of the woods in those days. Today, it's much more open today out there. And she's sitting there, and she realized the stone she was sitting on was a big slab, and the edge of it, she started noticing the edge of it, I guess, being a little scalloped or serrated. And then she reached underneath her where she was sitting, and she pulled out a piece of schist. The schist is it's before this granite becomes granite, actually. It's kind of a very brittle stone. It hasn't gone through the next process of becoming this hard granite, and we are the granite state. So she realized that it had been knocked off by somebody. Somebody actually knocked this piece off the stone that she was sitting on, but she realized also it was brittle. So why would they do that if this piece of stone couldn't be used as a tool? It's way too brittle. You can't make an arrowhead. You can't make a stone knife out of it. So she looked underneath it, and she saw the propping stone too. And because Dave had told our staff to look for these kind of things. So I guess that really raised her curiosity and I guess a little excitement. She told Dave. Dave soon came down, to visit and saw that, and quite amazed by this. The next year, he brought in Dr. Gary Hume, our state archaeologist, and Dr. Gary Hume was a lithic specialist. He knew how stone was made into tools, utensils, and weapons and kind of that kind of thing. So he oversaw the project with David Stewart Smith. They excavated under it, and they found hundreds of pieces of little flakes that had been hammered off the edge of that stone. And as you look at the stone, you'll see it's all serrated. That was the first one we found. That stone was probably about a 3,000 to 4,000 pound stone. Over the next few years, they found a couple more of these, all propped up artificially. Today, we have about 34 of these all over the hilltop, up to 1,000 feet from the main site. It dawned on us most recently that whoever was building the site had a much bigger project, and they were out there preparing these stones. They would work a fissure or crack in the bedrock. They would drive wedges in there. They would prop it, and then they get the edge of it up, and then they could start shaping it. And of course, the next step would be to get it to the main site if that was their intention. And at that time, the hilltop was pretty bare. We didn't have the forest up there, so you didn't have the trees in the way trying to drag a stone. You didn't have soft soil. Even if you use log rollers, you don't want the log rollers sinking into soft soil. I suppose you could wait till winter when it's cold, but then you have the winter conditions making it very difficult too. So we're pretty sure when they built this site, they were looking at a fairly clear hill. And Pat Hume, now the same name as Dr. Gary Hume, but they're not married. She was the president of the New Hampshire Archaeological Society. Everybody thought they were married. They were not. They're still friends. They're both still alive. But she was married to a doctor of geology at Tufts University, who was very useful in the way the soil, all about the geology in New Hampshire, basically, from the Ice Age to present day. And she did a bunch of shovel test pits starting around 1992, and actually up to about 3 years ago when she retired. She's 92 years old now. But around 92, she started going out and doing shovel test pits, measuring soil depth, profile all those layers of soil, and recording that. It was a 50-centimeter hole across, square holes. If she found anything interesting, she would stop, and then she would do a full-scale excavation. So these were what they are, shovel test pit, they call it. But they used trowels and brushes, too. It's very carefully done. And I assisted her on many of those, plus some of her other assistants helped. I think we did about 90 of them, about one per acre. We have 106 acres. And but early on, after a couple dozen, she started saying, "I think when this site was built, it appears," and she consulted with her husband, that doctor of geology, that the hilltop was probably pretty bare. And with a bare hill, you can see the astronomical alignments without trees in the way, without much soil. The site has a whole system of underground drains. You would need those drains to keep the bedrock dry. Otherwise, the water will puddle up. So that might account for why we have drains, some of them up to 65 feet that go underground to keep the bedrock dry. So somebody engineered those first, realizing you had a water problem. Bedrock doesn't absorb water too well. And also when you're going out looking for these stones to quarry, you can see the bedrock and say, I think this is a good spot. Look at that bedrock there. It has some fractures in it. I think we can get in there, shove wooden wedges in there or stone wedges. We can pop that slab. We can, prop it up. We can start working on it. We have 34 of these things. I'm sure we're going to find more of these as we keep looking in the woods because they're hiding out there. So that, to us, shows that it was an ancient culture, not some modern farmer out there. Farmers usually try to get rid of rocks. I don't get that space for that. So this is part of the Stone Age technology. As Dr. Gary Hume said, the big slabs and the roof slabs, wall slabs, sacrificial table, the astronomical alignments, the orthostats I mentioned previously, and even the layered slabs that are stacked up in the walls around the main site, like the 16 acres. Those are all manufactured slabs. Those aren't just something that happens naturally. A few of them might get popped up by nature, but for the most part, these are actually taken. And they show signs of Stone Age, dressing. So hammer stones against stone, not metal tools. So that kind of puts a site back into a Stone Age. Then we have the astronomical data. We have the carbon datings. Yeah, we have 16 carbon datings. So now we have OSL. And the OSL is optically stimulated luminescence. And we had it done in 2020. We got the results back in 2022. And one of them was from the roof of the Oracle Chamber. And before they came up, they asked, do you have a couple of good spots that we could do testing? And I said, well, maybe the Oracle Chamber roof, maybe the watch house. And I was working with a couple of people on that. And the lead was Dr. Feathers from the University of Washington, his two assistants from Brookhaven National Laboratory in New York. And then he had another, other assistants too. And I was working with one of them from a group called NERA, New England Antiquities Research Association, that my dad actually started in 1964. So NERA was involved with that too. And so I went up there and I took a T-probe my dad had made back in the 60s or 70s, just a very thin rod with a handle on it, push it into the soil. And on the oracle chamber roof, I thought I'd go down 5 or 6 or 7 inches. I actually went down between 17 inches of dirt was on the roof to 24. I was quite amazed. And they put little flags in the holes because OSL is a light test. It's the last time that soil or rocks saw the light of day. And if the light gets into that tiny little hole, I want to make sure they didn't dig there because that light got into the hole, it actually contaminates the soil sample. So I told them, they said, that's perfect. That's what we need. A couple inches wouldn't work. That's perfect. Well, that date came back 1550 AD. And it said that the last time that soil, it was several
Say
inches
that,
down.
Dennis. Say that date again.
Yeah,
What did that testing reveal?
Yeah, 1550 AD. So that's before the colonial period for sure in New England. That's not a colonial European settler building that chamber. 1550, almost 500 years ago. And what Dr. Feather says, of course, this chamber was built before this. And the question is, how many years before this was that chamber built? And then you have this dirt, building up, probably naturally, because everywhere we've done so far, we find the layers of stratigraphy. If somebody just shoveled the dirt up there all at once, it would be one color, but we'll get different color bands represent different time periods.
Right.
So that was interesting. And then we have, the other dates pushing the site back towards 4,000 years. So that's a minimum date. That's not a date when it was built. That's just a minimum date at 1550 AD. The other sample
That's
was
the
the
last
watch
time it was exposed.
to the light, exactly. Yeah. And then it's, again, question, was a roof bare for many, many centuries or many decades or many years? And then the soil builds up in New England. It's about an inch of soil accumulation on a level spot. Takes about 125 years. So if you had 24 inches, you can multiply that times 125. But that's just an average. You can't go exactly by
Gotcha.
that. But that could
Gotcha.
represent
Yep.
3,000 years. That could be 3,000 years of soil buildup if it's undisturbed and if that's what it is. It's a possibility of just 3,000. We just don't know for sure. I'm sure in the future we'll have even better techniques. And I suppose the thing to do is get that 24 inches. He took only one sample for there. My wife goes, she didn't take one a few inches above that, kind of to get a different time period as the soil built up. It's $1,000 per sample, so they did not. So he went down to the watch house.
A little cost prohibitive there.
It comes back to money, and that's important, So we did 4 samples on the site, and NERA did have some funding to help, and we contributed money for it, obviously, too, because that's what we do. But NERA was very nice because they wanted to do places from here to Virginia, and we were one of the ones selected. And they did have a couple benefactors left them money, and that was very nice, and a bit of money too, so they could carry out this project. They did the watch house. There's actually the chamber there. I don't know if you have a picture of the watch house. Besides the oracle chamber, it's probably one of the more interesting structures on this site because of what we know about it so far. It's a satellite structure. It's about 350 feet from the main site, kind of to the southeast. It's the first chamber you came to when you took the tour. So you got our visitor center and you go up either one way or the other way. There's 2 ways of going up. Both ways take you right to the watch house. It's a boulder with a chamber right next to it. And Goodwin knew about it back in the 30s when he was working on the site. His focus was on the main site. We talked about the main site too a bit at the beginning, and that's about a 1-acre area. It has a chain link fence that surrounds it today with barbed wire on top. And that was put up in 1937, and the fence is in remarkably good shape. We take care of it as part of the history of the site now. But Goodwin put it there to stop people from going in there and playing around, knocking things down, and also taking away artifacts. So he put the barbed wire facing in towards the site, hoping that would, help reduce theft of artifacts, whatever type pottery or, stone, whatever you find up there, and messing around with the site. So that's the 1-acre area surrounded by today 106 acres of land. The whole hilltop was part of another hill. And as we studied it, we found these stone slabs all over the hilltop. We found other things such as serpentine walls out there shaped like serpents. But the watch house is, again, away from the main site. There are 50 structures like that in New England. A glacial boulder built on the right side, the structure built on the left as you're facing into it. There's one in Connecticut at Gunjewamp near the Navy base in Connecticut. And that is a 250-acre site. It has a lot of the stonework that we have at our site, including that type of chamber. And there are 49 others elsewhere in New England that has that same kind of, I suppose, design to it, you know. But what we didn't know is the watch house, until more recently, has an illumination inside of it. I don't know if you looked inside of it, Dave. There's a quartzite stone, a beautiful quartzite stone as you look into the structure at the back wall. Everything else is gray granite kind of. And this is kind of
Right.
a whitish colored stone. It's been talked
Yep.
about for years. Even paranormal, some people call him the father of the paranormal, Hans Holter started visiting us in 1970. And by 1992, he wrote a book called Long Before Columbus, on Columbus's 500-year anniversary. And he mentions that actually the person who did the foreword, Barbara Hand Cloud, actually wrote the foreword, and she'd been to our site. She was actually intrigued by that stone, you know, and we was there sometime before 1992, and she did that. And in 1996, our souvenir book came out, the very first one, not the very first book, but a souvenir book on our site. And we just put the latest one out in 2018. Joanne Lambert, who wrote that book, was intrigued by that stone, often wondering what the devil is that, you know? So why would they put that like that? It seems to be something important, you know? So in 2019, a friend of mine from Texas was up. She was visiting. She had an app on her phone. I had heard of it, but I hadn't put it on my phone yet, called Sunseeker. It does astronomical, you know, calculations where the sun rises. It's kind of cool. You can actually go up there with Sunseeker any day of the year and look at our alignments, and you can actually kind of simulate the sun rising or setting, and you can go back in time, I guess. But she went into the chamber, and she stood in there, and she used the Sunseeker, and she said to her boyfriend and to myself, she goes, I think the sunlight will enter this chamber and illuminate this stone maybe around 9 o'clock on the equinox morning. It's a special day, you know, the equinox. I said, well, that's really interesting. I said, well, we are having a forestry project starting. And she was here in 19 in the spring. The project started 6 years ago. Right about now, they were bringing the equipment in for the winter to start thinning out the forest and open up all the astronomical alignments. It was a 2-winter project, and they did a beautiful job. A year later, we were up there to see if she was correct. It was the spring of 2020. And we were standing there just before 8 o'clock in the morning, watching the sun to see what it would do. And just about 8 o'clock, the rock has kind of a neat design to it. And what happened is the entrance of the structure, the ancient people designed the structure entrance to create a shadow light effect. And what it did, we had no idea it would do this. It actually, about 8 o'clock for just a couple of minutes, the top of that stone is framed by the shadow and light, the same shape as that stone. We stayed there to 8:30. We looked back at 8:30, and that light shadow turned into, looks like a hand with a finger pointing back at that stone. And I started doing some, you know, thinking about that and talking to other people. And our thought is that is kind of like what happens at the Newport Tower in Rhode Island on the winter solstice. Is a egg shape just above one of the arches, and there's a window box on the other side of the Newport Tower. I don't know if all your listeners know about the Newport Tower. They can Google it. It's really famous. It's been on History Channel, Travel Channel, Discovery Channel. It's a mystery who built this tower right in Newport, Rhode Island. But anyway, the light goes in there at 9 o'clock at the Newport Tower, and it illuminates this. It looks like an egg, just like an egg. And the thought is, and this, some people talk about the Knights Templar building it. There's Governor Benedict Arnold, not the traitor, but it was a uncle, I believe, or Benedict Arnold. There's a family relationship, but it's a governor going back earlier in time than Benedict Arnold, the traitor. That this illumination actually represents fertility. The sun enters the womb of that window, it goes and strikes that egg, and it illuminates it. And that's what this seems to do in our watch house. Like that's the womb, the light, the fertilization, but ours is in the spring, not the winter. Newgrange in Ireland I've been to, it has looks like a big gigantic 300-foot flying saucer. It's in the Boyne Valley, north of Dublin. And there's other ones similar called Nelson Dalth near them. They're gigantic, built over 5,000 years ago. But there's a 65-foot tunnel, and you go into the entrance, but above your head there's a window, like we talked about windows, you know, and the light goes down 65 feet on the winter solstice at 9 o'clock, like the Newport Tower. They're in different time zones, so different time of the day, but the same hour of the day. It hits the back wall. It's cruciform in shape, and it illuminates the back. And each year, the Irish government actually has a lottery, and people can put their name in, and if they win, they get to go see this. We've been into the chamber, but not on the, and that's the watch house, actually. Thank you, Dave, for pulling that. That's actually hard to see it there. That's in the distance. Let's see. That's looking up at it from a distance. That's just, I think that's one of the orthostat stones. That's the pathway near the watch house. But that was quite a thing. So I sent the message to it. I said, the alignment works. It's really cool, but it happened about 8 o'clock, not 9 o'clock. And I said, well, regardless, we're in the eastern part of the eastern time zone. If you go out to Louisville, Kentucky, I used to be based out there flying for UPS for a while back in the 80s. That's more on the western side. So I said, regardless, it's early in the morning. It illuminates. 3 years later, I'm standing there watching that event with a woman, and we had a nice crowd show up for the equinox alignment over a fallen 8.5-foot monolith. That's about, I think at the time that is just 6:30 or whatever it is. And then we have one more alignment by the oracle chamber, just a little bit after that. So you can watch one alignment where the sun rises over the fallen monument. Then you go to a different place by the oracle chamber, and you can see another monolith with a notch on top, and the sun actually goes through that for the equinox. And then about 8 o'clock, we were going down to see this event I just told you about. But this time I went down there at 7:30. We went down there, and I said to the lady, we got a half an hour before this event takes place. Do you want to go down to the building and get warm? Or, it's kind of chilly out. And everybody else had gone. And she goes, just talking, she goes, we could probably, hang out here or something. I turned around, I looked behind me into the chamber, and the egg was completely framed on the bottom. So the bottom of the egg,
Wow.
but because it's like the bottom, and then 30 minutes later, you watch that go into the north of the stone that's framed. And then 30 minutes later, that boulder, the sun should rise over there in 2034. We're going to have, I'm sorry, excuse me, that's incorrect. Each year on February 1st, which is a cross quarter day, the sun rises over that boulder. So it's a solar alignment from the astronomical center. That was figured out in the 1970s. The lunar alignment over it takes place every 18.5 years. So it's a lunar alignment too. And that next one on the lunar minor standstill, moonrise south, we call it, it will rise over that, right over that, and it'll be in 2034, that time period. And so we'll hopefully be watching that because until the forestry project took place, you can never see the moon or the sunrise to the east because the trees are in the way. So we're going to watch it in 2034 for the first time, so that should be exciting. We'll get some photographs of it. But it's also the head of a serpent, we think, a wall. And the serpent walls were not known about 10 years ago. The first one I found was in 2016 in the spring. It was a short, straight section of wall under 30 feet. I had gone by it many times on my ATV on the way to my dad's house. He lived on the north side of the property. He built a house here in 1990. And I was just going by there in 2016. I was out there maybe collecting firewood on my ATV, and just the way the sun struck the wall that particular day, I said, well, doesn't that look weird? I said, it seems to have like a block on one side and a tapered body. And so I got off my ATV, walked about 60 feet over to it. I'm looking at it closely like, wow, this is interesting. It really does taper down to a flat rectangular stone about 3 feet long with little rounded corners. But the body's tapered, and then it has a big block on the other side, facing on the south side of it. And it looks like the block actually fell down. It looks like it had like a cutout in the bottom of that. It's maybe a block, maybe 2 feet long, made out of granite, I guess, about a foot high. And I said, I think I'm looking at the head of a serpent. I think I'm looking at the body, and I'm looking at a flat tail here. And I looked it over. I went on the other side of it. I'm looking, and it's on a ridge of bedrock. And I said, it's almost 30 feet long. I said, this does not look like a farmer's wall whatsoever. And I kept staring at it going, am I seeing an effigy of a serpent? And I was aware of the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. I've been aware of that probably since
Right.
the 90s. Fantastic, So I never heard of a serpent wall. So I showed it to some people that spring. And then I started finding a couple other walls, including one almost 140 feet long that was S-shaped, a beautiful S-shape with a triangular stone head and a rounded boulder where the tail would be. And this is a big sweeping curve. And we opened up the trail there in 1974. We knew the wall was there. We never paid attention to its shape. And then we found another wall that looked like a serpent. And that's all in 2016. And then at some point, I'm looking at the watch house, and somebody drew to my attention. It looked a little bit like a snake, and there's another little construction of a wall series of stones. It looked like a spiral of stones, actually. And we still got to do more investigation on that. And they said, I wonder if this is connected to like a serpent's tail. Where would the head be? And we're looking back at the watch house, going, "Oh my God, the wall kind of goes down to this watch house, you know." And it does kind of look like a serpent's head. It's a natural glacial boulder. We don't know if they did any modification to it. They'd have to look it over very carefully, but I think it's all natural. But it's the shape of a head. You know, a lot of natural things. Our state logo was the old man in the mountain in New Hampshire, which fell down in 2003. And that was beloved by many people. It's on the side of I believe the state police cars, the state highway trucks, the plows and everything. On their doors, they'll have these logos. It'll be the old man of the mountain. That was all natural, but unfortunately in 2023, one morning it was foggy or cloudy, and when that went away, people were looking up at it, and the whole thing was gone. You know, it was very, very sad, but it was natural. You know, but this boulder is natural, but it looks like a serpent. So upon looking at it even closer, looking at the wall that goes behind the boulder, there's so much woods out there, so much brush, we couldn't really make the shape out of it very good. We started looking at it a little bit closer, and it looked like it was undulating. And we're like, oh my God, look at that. The head, the body undulates, it's humps in the wall. And then it continued up to our astronomical alignment stones. We watch the sunrise or set, and it goes around, and it took a while to figure this all out. And it went around the whole, about 15 acres of land, and it comes right back down in a big counterclockwise loop. And near the front of the watch house, we always knew that the wall there had a hump in it. We never paid attention to the hump. It's just kind of a hump in this wall. It's all deliberate.
Right.
And then the wall, and it continues right in front of the, what would be the watch house entrance. And then it goes right in front of the boulder, which looks like, again, now we know it looks like the head of a serpent. And then it does a 90-degree twist with a pointed tail. And Goodwin saw that in the 30s. I came there the first time in 1955 at 18 months old, and none of us saw that this thing could be actually a shape of a snake, you know. And after we looked at it, we're like, oh my God, you can see the whole thing here. Well, back to the OSL, they were going to take a sample out of the watch house, but one of the ladies from Brookhaven National Laboratory, physicist, she actually went into the chamber with me. It's kind of tight quarters in there too. She pointed at the back wall and said the light had actually, either chipmunks or something had breached it. You could see the light coming through. She goes, so this is not going to be, you know, a good spot to take any soil. It's been contaminated. She was going to try it on the other side of the chamber, and then realized that part of the chamber had been repaired by David Stewart Smith back in the 1980s. You could see some plastic, and then the soil over the plastic where part of a wall repair was done. So they looked around a bit, and they decided to do what is that hump, the end of that 2,550-foot serpent, which we actually GPSed in 2017. We GPSed it, and it's 2,550 feet. So that wall comes right in front of the watch house and humps, and they decided to take a core there, and they took the OSL tool. They got their dirt, and they do it in a darkroom environment with a tent and everything. You know, they take the core, they go in there, and they take the dirt out of it so they can use the coring tool again. Well, the result of that was 1400 AD. So that, again, that's before Columbus, and that's prehistoric. So that wall appears to have been sitting there before 1400, and then the dirt came along later. So that's another way we kind of dated this, you know, the site. Although it doesn't give a date of construction, it says, well, the wall was sitting there in 1400. It could have been sitting there 1,000 years before that, or hundreds of years before that. And that serpent might be the biggest serpent effigy in the world. The Great Serpent Mound in Ohio, we were there 2 years ago, and they say that's the biggest serpent effigy in the world. It's 1,350 feet. And that may be the longest serpent dirt effigy, and it's dirt built on a stone platform. It's an amazing structure. I mean, it's incredible. And they say there are 94 of those all the way out to Iowa, built out of earth. So that's not the only one, but it's the most famous, and it is the biggest. But our effigy being 2,550 feet, if it ever gets conclusive evidence that's what it is, that may be the biggest serpent in the world. And then, of course, we'll find one bigger in South America, because serpents and dragons are worldwide. But it might be, it might be the biggest serpent. And it can represent coming around right in front of the mouth of it, the tail. could represent the Ouroboros. Usually it's biting its tail in the mouth, but a few of the Ouroboroses you pull up online, you'll see they make jewelry. It goes back to Egypt, Greece, and even Native Americans. You'll see the paintings and pottery and stuff like that, petroglyphs, petroglyphs. The serpent looks like wrapping around, like biting its tail. So it's not old world only. It seems to be over here. And I think in the old world, they say it, and maybe in the new world, it represents a circle of life, wisdom, wholesomeness, and the serpent can represent like protection. You wonder if this wraps around
Hmm.
it wraps around the main site. It touches every astronomical marker stone where the sun rises or sets over. You have to have 2 points for an alignment, your foresight and back sight, like a gun sight. And so all the back sights, excuse me, the foresights, the ones that are way out there, are part of the body of the serpent. And then it comes back, it does a hump, and right in front of where the mouth would be on the serpent and the nose, it goes right up against that, and then it does a 90-degree pointed tail, which is beautiful. But there's one stone just beyond the tail. And I said, why did somebody leave that stone there? You know, you got your pointed tail and then this other stone beyond it. I was kind of annoyed, like, why would they do that? Who did that? Or has it always been there? You know, thinking about it, I said, like, we found a few more like that. We have a tail. The tail kind of ends, but beyond it, there's a couple stones. We started seeing this repeating pattern. It might be, it represents rattles on the tail, possibly. It's a possibility. But that stone there, 2 years ago, I was standing on it because we were walking around when we were watching the alignments before with the illumination starting in 2020. We're just kind of standing in front of it. So I decided to stand on that, what could be a rattle at the end of the tail. And it was a perfect position to actually watch the illumination from. It could be
Wow.
coincidental, but I don't know if everything's coincidence. You know, it looks like that stone might represent a rattle, but it's where you stood to actually watch a very nice alignment with that illumination for that 1 hour, you know. So
Or yeah,
that
no,
structure is pretty amazing, you know. And by
absolutely.
the
Let 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 me
Yeah, go
ask you
ahead,
this
please.
question. Did Were you ever able to like call in any of the local tribes? Did they ever take a look at the site and say, "Hey, this is either ours or not ours"? Did any of those local tribes ever make a claim to the land and the stone structures that set on it?
That's a great question, David. We have had Native Americans over the years, and some of the stories we heard of Native Americans saying that the place was taboo, it was a place that they stayed away from, and we don't know how accurate that is. We did have, however, back in 2020, which a lot of stuff was going on that year with us with GPS. We were doing all sorts of
Sure.
cool stuff with the OSL and LiDAR and everything. We had the Holzer files. I mentioned Hans Holzer, the father of paranormal. That TV still aired on Travel Channel and Discovery Network.
Yep.
And Hans spent many years at our site. He actually did the Leonard Nimoy show on us in Turkey. For the second episode, he directed that. Hey, I was there in '76. I had forgotten about the fact he directed Leonard Nimoy's show. So they did a whole show about Hans Holzer. He died in 2009, the same year as my dad did, and they were friends. He lived in New York. He's from Austria originally. And so they brought in Black Eagle for the show. They brought in Scott Walters from America on Earth because he moved over from ABC Disney, his show America on Earth, over to the Travel Channel. And Discovery Network that runs that whole thing said, bring in Scott Walters. He has an audience. It'll help Dave Schrader, the host of the Holzer Files, you know, bring a more audience. So Scott was there and a bunch of other people. I was on it a couple of times, but they brought in Black Eagle from Massachusetts, and his name is Daryl Jameson. And Daryl had been to the site back around 2015. I think he came in with Scott Walters at that time with a group, you know, an entourage of probably 20 people, I think. And he had an episode on the site, and he said he had a bad reaction to the site. It's a beautiful site. He goes, but it really affected me badly. He goes, it's not my people. And if you go to that particular episode that aired in 2021 on us, Ancient Evil, he's on there talking about the site. He's a chief of it's a group, and it's part of the Wampanoag Indians down in, or Native Americans down in near Plymouth, Mass, near Cape Cod area. But he's a
Right.
branch of that, and he goes, yeah. So he goes, I will not go up to film on the site. So what they did is they told him, we'll set up a place out back at the visitor center, about halfway between the watch house and the visitor center. And they had the whole thing set up as a big studio. It was pretty amazing what they did for him. It was really cool. And while they're getting that ready, I had a nice couple of times to talk to him anyway. But so he filmed at night up there, and his story about his tribe and himself, as well as his experience at our site, is on that Ancient Evil. It was the second season. I think it was episode, I'm going to say 13 perhaps, and that's the Holzer Files. That's just an example. Paula Underwood came to us in the 1990s. She was Iroquois. Her ancestors are from the Great Lakes region into New York, kind of, but she lived in California. Her family must have moved out there quite a while ago. She was an IBM, I believe, consultant. Very, very intelligent woman. And she learned her family's past 10,000 years from her dad, I believe it was. And her book came out called The Walking People in the 1990s. And she became a friend of the lady that wrote our 1996 souvenir guide. They became very friendly. In fact, our Joanne, who wrote our guide, actually would travel to some of her talks in Texas and different places around the country. And then she brought it to our place twice. And it says in there that her ancestry talks about these chambers, these stone structures built on hills, probably in New York, perhaps, and there are many of these structures in New York, that were not built by their people. They were built by these strangers, So there's another episode, or maybe that the Native Americans saying this was not ours, these are strange people who built these stone structures. And she knew nothing about the Northeast stone structures, I think, until the 1990s. And when she became aware of it, maybe from a TV show, or maybe she read something, I think what the story is. There is a story where she first heard of us, and also the other structures. And she was quite not only shocked, but surprised, because there are 10,000 years of oral tradition that her dad, and I guess he had to learn it two different ways so she'd have an accurate story, I guess, according to what he did, that these stone structures do exist in the East, and so that fits into her ancient oral tradition. But she didn't think it was her people
That's
that built
fascinating.
it.
So
So a little bit
so
there,
that's
not a
fascinating.
lot, but yeah.
Right, that's fascinating because the Native Americans are basically saying we know about it, but it's not ours, sort of a thing.
That's yeah. We certainly welcome other maybe Native Americans with a oral tradition. Sometimes they'll share it with you, and if they do, that's really nice, and then it might add to it. I did meet another Native American from the Cape Cod area, and he probably was Wampanoag too, I think, the Plymouth, Mass area. And she goes, my oral tradition talks about, I believe, the Vikings coming into the Cape Cod area 1,000 years ago, and we know that the Viking axe head was found out in Cape Cod. There was when the Pilgrims landed out on the Cape Cape Cod, on further out on the arm of Cape Cod out there. They actually they were hungry. They thought they were digging for bushels of buried corn, I guess, or maize, and they found skeletons with reddish or blondish hair. And I don't know how accurate that story is. Some people suggested there were burials of Vikings in that area. There's also the Bass River on Cape Cod. There was some, back in the 40s, I think Harvard University was involved with that excavation and study. They thought that they found where a Viking or some sort of ancient boat could have been brought in there. They found the remains where it would be brought in, probably for the winter or for repairs. It was like a dry dock area. And we got all the reports in my dad's files. I don't know if the jury's still out on that, or whether they decided that, no, that's from like the 1700s, blah, 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 or 1600s, but not 1,000 years ago, But
right.
So the Vikings may have made it into New England. The Maine coon cat, my dad had a couple. It's a state cat of Maine. It's a half breed. It's actually a Norwegian forest cat and a cat out extinct. So DNA showed that, and it's another possibility indicating that the Vikings may have made it. They say after the Viking period, after they get into, because we visited Alonzo Meadow 3 years ago. We went up to Alonzo Meadow in Newfoundland. They say that after the Viking period, around 1050 AD, the Greenlanders kept coming down until around 1400, and then the climate turns colder. Greenland was abandoned. Iceland was never abandoned. There's a Gulf Stream kick. So we were in Iceland. It was pretty cool. We'd never been to Greenland, but the story is that the Greenlanders came for 400 years after Leif Erikson into the New World. I don't think they just went to Newfoundland and stopped. I think they probably went further west and further south, possibly. Just have to find the evidence to support that, And they talked about Irish Caldy monks. And the Irish Caldy monks were trying to escape persecution, and some of them had abandoned Ireland, and they headed up to Iceland, in the Faroe Islands, then Iceland, and then maybe over possibly towards Greenland. And the Vikings in their sagas talk about bumping into these white robed men, I think all the way over to into Canada. Uh, and there's some debate over that. But Mr. Goodwin, the guy that worked on our site, I mentioned in 1937, and then he worked on it and he died in 1950. And he wrote 4 books. The last book he wrote, he was very sick, so it wasn't well put together. It was called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England, where he put forth the idea that the Irish monks were escaping Viking persecution, and they moved inland. And some of the sagas talk about this, about rolled men, some of the Viking, the Greenland saga, I think, the Eric saga. So it might be true. But he felt our site was like one of the main places, almost like, almost like it was like the cathedral of, because they found 15 other places around New England, like in Hopkinton, Mass, where the Boston Marathon starts. There's a Chambers. There's one in Acton, Mass, Upton, Mass. And today we know there's probably 50 different locations and structures. But back in Goodwin's day, he only knew of about 16 sites besides ours. And he thought these were a little smaller, what would you call it, communities of Irish monks, and they're trying to Christianize Native Americans. You're also trying to avoid being captured by the Vikings. And our site was like the main site where, like he called it, like one of the higher ranking priests would stay. And he thought our site was a living site, a religious site, but also a living site. Today, we think it's more of a ceremonial site, not really a living site per se, where people live. They lived away around here, but not on the main site for a couple different reasons. So the Irish quality monk thing, it's still kind of out there. Our site predates that by that time period for almost 3,000 years. So we don't think it was the Irish quality monks building our site.
Jeez.
And that's because of the technology and everything we've learned since Goodwin's day. But he died thinking the Irish quality monks built it when he died in 1950. So the Irish monks are in there, the Vikings are in there. His first thoughts when he saw the site in 36, he thought it was actually a Viking site. But then he realized Vikings didn't build these stone structures like this. They used sod houses, kind of a different building material. So he changed his whole idea over the course of 37 and 38. I think he became a Irish quality monk, a supporter, I guess, of that theory.
Gotcha. Dennis, let me ask you this question, and then what I want to do is maybe go through a couple of pictures and see
Sure.
if you can kind of elaborate on those. Is that okay?
Great. Absolutely.
So in your estimation and the estimation of other scholars and other people who've done work out there on that site, we know that it's about 4,000 years old. Do we have any ideas on where, like, if you had to hedge your bets, hey, these folks came from this place and built this, where do you think those folks are coming from, Dennis?
Right. That's an excellent question. We've been asked that for years. If they were coming across the Atlantic Ocean, the most evidence supporting that would be from the Iberian Peninsula of Spain and Portugal. And Barry Fell, because of Barry Fell's work, and his work is still very controversial. The mainstream archaeologists still basically criticize it 50 years later. But the Phoenician writing, the Libyan writing, and the Celtic writing, the style of it was he called Iberic, which is Spain and Portugal. The Celts were in there, the Phoenicians were in Spain and Portugal, and the Libyans from Libya were in there. It was a melting pot. There were other people in there too. And he felt that they were like a melting pot and that they jumped off from that place to the New World, both to South America and into Central, into North America, according to Barry Fell. I have seen the comparisons of structures like for instance, the V-Hut. The V-Hut at our site, you must have saw that little structure with a roof on, kind of a wedge shape or V shape. You can find those in Ireland.
And we'll show those later here. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, there's a lot of orientation of the structure, the size of the structure, and the shape of the structure. You can only have so many coincidences, but we have like the east-west chamber, the V-Hut, including the chamber in ruins, and some of the other stonework there, structures are very, very similar to what you can find over in Western European sites, whether it's in Spain, Portugal, Ireland, England, Scotland, Wales. And we've been to a lot of those places over in Europe, including Malta. Oh, that's a little different, but I would say Western Europe, there's so many similarities to what we have in the Northeast. And I think there's 800 locations in the Northeast, and a location can have one chamber, like Danville, New Hampshire, or Windham, New Hampshire, or Plastow, or you can have a site like ours, multiple structures at one site over 106 acres. But amazingly, 10 years ago, in 16, a lot of stuff was happening. We were finding both windows, these beautiful windows, and serpentine walls, and we were finding more of those quarried slabs. But we were finding, what was the point I was trying to get to?
I'm not breaking any news here. We live in spiritually perilous times. It seems like danger is all around us or our family spiritually all the time. But our God hasn't left us defenseless. We read in Ephesians chapter 6 verse 17, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. So in our spiritual battles, the scriptures are our sword. But just like real swords, not all canon of scripture are made equal. You need to make sure that you're entering the battle with the right gear. With that thought in mind, Drew Briney and others have been working on a project to bring you what is now being called the restored version of the scriptures. So, what is the restored version of the scriptures? The restored version is the most accurate, exhaustive, comfortable to read triple combination ever made. It was designed to honor Joseph Smith's revelatory words and edits through clean and accurate Joseph approved texts. The restored version contains each book found in the modern LDS triple combination. That is the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price, except it has Joseph's original inspired text in an easy to read format. It restores the lectures on faith, which were removed in 1921. It adds an additional 87 uncanonized revelations of Joseph Smith, as well as 33 revelations received by Brigham Young, John Taylor, and Wilford Woodruff, and other members of the Quorum of the 12. Each copy of the restored version is built to last. These scriptures look good, feel comfortable, and are bound to last. The restored version uses cover material that is ideal for high quality books that is both hard wearing and soft, and should handle many years of use. It has beautiful gold and silver gilded edges. It has sturdy, flexible binding, making it so the book may comfortably and safely be laid on a desk. It has reliable paper that is very thin, yet sturdy and thick enough that it's hard to see through, and comes with marking ribbons so that you never lose your reading place. Each copy of the restored version are built with the intent of lasting for years and years, just like the LDS versions of the triple combination. You might be asking yourself, what are the benefits of owning your own copy of the restored version of the scriptures? Well, how's this for starters? Number one, the spiritual significance. The restored version contains every known revelation of Joseph Smith, as well as those of his first successors. The historical significance. While the foundational text for the restored version is the latest edition of each book of scripture that Joseph approved, the restored version carefully documents through footnotes, italicized texts, every substantive change made by Joseph or his editing committee, making the restored version a truly original set of scriptures. Formatting significance. The restored version contains no columns, no cumbersome cross references, and no paragraph breaks at every verse, just like the original, and has been improved with many verse numbers in the paragraphs, which provide a smooth, seamless reading experience that makes it easy to lose track of time while reading and makes it easier to see the larger narrative within the scriptures. It is also the first original editions published that can be used with study guides, since almost all of the other originals don't have verses in it. The restored version offers pure doctrine in the most historically transparent Mormon triple combination ever made, with a modern format that provides for a smooth, seamless, and spiritual read. Now, to get your copy today, just go to www.restoredscriptures.com or click the link in this episode's show notes. Again, that is www.restoredscriptures.com, or click the link in this episode's show notes and order your copy today and arm you and your family with the Word of God. Now, let's get back to our conversation.
At one site, over 106 acres. But amazingly, 10 years ago, in 16, a lot of stuff was happening. We were finding both windows, these beautiful windows, and serpentine walls, and we were finding more of those quarried slabs. But we were finding, what was the point I was trying to get to? Town in North Stonington, Connecticut, a book came out called Ceremonial Stonework. And that one town in North Stonington, down near the coast, near Mystic, Connecticut, and Gunjiwamp's just down the road about 10 miles. It's right near the Navy base in Groton, Connecticut. That one town in this book, as I'm looking at it at a meeting, a Erie meeting, 2017, and I didn't know if we had any serpent walls in the Northeast. I didn't know if we had any windows and some of these other features. I looked at the book before the gentleman spoke, on this book table. You could buy, he had a whole bunch of books for sale from different authors and different speakers. And I'm like, wow, 8,000 structures, 270 photographs in this book, 25 categories of structures. And I thought, this has to be the whole Northeast. This is got to be part of Canada. And as I get into it, it's a town in North Stonington. That one town in North Stonington has 8,000 structures. It has 25 categories, and one of them was a serpent wall. Okay, the serpent wall is there, number 400 in that one town, from 30 feet up to 300 feet. The average is about 90 feet long. They're linear, rectilinear in shape, S-shaped. I'm like, they have serpent walls here. Amazing, because we had no idea if anybody else had serpent walls. That really kind of confirmed. And just standing there looking at that before he spoke, and then I see windows, and we had found about a dozen. We have 36 windows up there, including pentagonal shaped windows in the stone walls themselves. And there's the windows. That's another category, So it's just amazing that one site can have 8,000 structures. Another site could have just a chamber, and there are 800
That's
locations.
incredible.
So it's it's not. We used to hear, Dave. I remember in the 70s when I was there, and even maybe in the 80s, more criticism, more controversy, more skepticism, particularly by mainstream, say, well, if this was a bunch of ancient stone builders building this site up here, why aren't there other structures anywhere else? And we would hear that. I said, well, first off, back then they knew of about 200 back in the 1970s. Obviously, they don't know. They're ignorant of the facts. There are other structures, but today with about 800 locations, with literally thousands of this stonework across the Northeast. And it's not just New England, New York. It actually goes out to Virginia. The serpentine walls go all the way out to California, Weed, California, by Mount Shasta. They're up in Winnipeg, near Denver. They're in Alabama. It goes right across the nation. So some of our features actually go across the whole continent. Because you go to Mexico, that's the whole thing with Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan and all of that. We've been down there too. I don't know. The jury's still out. I think, though, Native Americans were here in New Hampshire 13,000 years, so you have to look at them first. But then mainstream says they didn't build big stonework in the Northeast. And they may be wrong. Maybe this is Native American, and we're looking at it incorrectly because we've been told that Native Americans didn't build stonework. However, I think there is a connection to the old world. He mentioned the inscriptions. There's place names all over New England, mountains, rivers, valleys, and gorges that are not only Native American, like Merrimack, Lake Memphremagog, Mount Monadnock, and there's so many others that are not only Native American, but they're also Gaelic or Celtic with the same word, with the same meaning. So people might say, well, that's purely coincidental. The word sounds the same, it means the same, but that's a coincidence. So I think there is a connection to the old world at this point, So I don't know if I'll know before I pass away someday the truth. I was hoping we would have more of an answer before my dad died in 2009. And around that time, a lot of our researchers had passed away. James Woodall and so many others. They were basically the people at the beginning, kind of. Goodwin was really at the beginning, and then later, my dad and Frank Lynn, president of the Connecticut Archaeological Society, all these people were so heavily involved in this. And they passed away without an answer. I think they really enjoyed their work here, but we know more now than just because we've had more time to find things, and discover things. And if it wasn't for them, this site probably wouldn't exist today, or a lot of these sites would be gone today.
Are there any connections to that site back to because if I'm not mistaken, when I was there, I thought I saw something that hinted that it could have came from people who came out of the Mediterranean basin. Is that still a thought, or has that kind of been, I don't know, disqualified at this point?
Right. Well, some people talk about the Minoans, because I've been to Malta, I haven't been to Crete. And that was Frank Glenn, president of Connecticut Archaeological Society, found, I think, like a dozen different similarities between, actually in that case it was Malta, I think, and we've been to Malta. It's a fascinating place. But I think more Western European. We were going to show some pictures of the V hut. There's similarities in Spain, and there's similarities in Northwest Ireland, which we didn't get. Excuse me, that's incorrect. In Ireland, which we did get to. We did get to County Meath, these wedge tubes. But the east-west chamber looks like ones in Northwest Ireland, which we did not get to. They're like the giant's bed in Holland called the Houdendin, the giant's bed. They're also in Spain like that, but we saw them in France too. Near Carnac, we saw the galley grave, or gallery graves is what they call them in Europe. The orientations east and west out of true north. They run 20 to 60 feet. They're used as tombs, and they consist of kind of orthostats or big boulders with roofs on top. In all those places, they're always true east and west, and again they run within 20 to 60 feet in length. And our east-west chamber looks just like that. The V hut looks like that. The chamber in ruins looks like what I saw in France near Carnac, riding my bike, and I took a left, yelled at my wife. We were on bikes over there. We went to the from Paris to near Carnac. I forget the name of the station. We found a place to stay. We rented bicycles to run around and see all those standing stones in Carnac. But they have the east-west chamber there. They have the what looks like our chamber in ruins. And I said to my wife, "Hey, this is 1984 before cell phones." And she had a nice Nikon camera. I didn't have anything, so I said, "Hey, stop! We got to see this." It was in Gaelic and French. I don't know what it said, but I took a left. I knew it was an ancient site, And I got around the hedge, and there's the chamber standing out, just like the chamber in ruins with the roof still intact. I'm like, "Oh my God!" It looks like, and I didn't have any camera. I'm thinking she's coming back on her bike. I didn't see her for like 4 hours, and she wasn't very happy with me because it was a wife. You know what wives do? Like, "Where were you?" I'm like, "Where were you?" I saw the most extraordinary chamber. It looked like our chamber in ruins. So Western Europe has more similarities, I think, in the way the structures are designed. But the megalithic builders build all across, right into Russia. The Ural Mountains have over 3,500 megalithic. They're in, if you Google China or India, look at megalithic kind. They have some nice websites too. It's very similar to the Western European. And Austria, they go right into, let's see now, they go into Australia, has, they call it the Aussie Stonehenge. And that's interesting. And they're in New Zealand too. That's the most recent. I heard that there's megalithic sites in New Zealand, and that's on my bucket list to go there someday. But I would say Western Europe, I
Absolutely.
think yeah. So in the Mediterranean area,
Absolutely.
but more on the west coast of the Atlantic, I think, yeah.
Let me ask you this. Were you guys ever able to find any old burial sites? Were you able to genetically test any bones or anything like that to get an idea of the people that were there and get a date roughly about when it was last inhabited?
Yeah, that'd be that's a great question. The soil in New England is very acidic. It's not like England where it's chalky and limestone that kind of help preserve bones. So New England bones usually dissolve in a couple hundred years. But even the New Hampshire Archaeological Society, my dad was a member of that. My uncle was a vice president of that. So I get their literature and everything. And our chief archaeologist, Pat Hume, was the president of that group. She was with us for 32 years. And I talked to her about that too. She goes, "Yeah, we do occasionally find bones that go back more than a few hundred years." She says 200 or 300 years, they usually dissolve back into soil. But we have found in peat, maybe in clay, bones going back a few thousand years. We did do some DNA testing 2 years ago on bones that were found by Mr. Goodwin in front of the east-west chamber, which we think could have been used as a tomb. These are 3 different bones, and they're found basically on bedrock with just a little bit of soil. We know it because we have photographs from 1920 of a young man standing by the east-west chamber, and you can see the bedrock, and you can see debris and
Right.
dirt. But there's no place to bury a body there, unless you're going to just put them in the chamber itself, which the ancient people would do. Put the body in there, let the flesh come off, maybe take the body out, and properly dispose them, and then use it over again. That's the old world. They talk about that when you go over in England and Ireland. You see some of these chambers. Yeah, like the West Kent at Loughborough in England. We've been to that. It's near Stonehenge. And they found, I forget how many skeletal remains in that thing, and the bones are still pretty good after almost 5,000 years. So these bones were looked at by the Smithsonian in 1968. They were driven down there by a school teacher from a local school. She was nice enough to do that. And then a woman named Dr. Lucien, I believe it is St. Hoyen, if I got the name correct. She's a physical anthropologist. She looked at those bones and some bones from the watch house, which is a different story. But those bones, she looked at them carefully. And although they did not have DNA back then, she said, I believe she's looking at the texture, she's looking at the color of the bones, the shape of the bones, and the density, and how hard they were. We got the whole report anyway. We read it several times, and I don't remember all the details. She goes, "I think these are human bones." She goes, "You have to be totally positive," but she goes, at the very end of it, I think these are human. We had them DNA'd by up in Canada in Thunder Bay 2 years ago, at, I believe it's called Lakefront University. And the laboratory is run by husband and wife at the university. And we did 2 out of the 3. We sent the 2 up separately to customs in 2 different packages. We kept the 3rd one in safekeeping. We probably always will keep that one, because what they do is
Right.
they have to reduce the bone to do the testing, so the bone partially gets, used. Uh, so we get the results back about 2 months later that they checked it against 39,500 different samples of human beings, and it turns out it was from the it was from the Mediterranean area, as you mentioned the Mediterranean earlier, and the upper Mediterranean, and that the northern part of the Mediterranean, and specifically Greek ancestry. You're like, well, what the heck is that? We know the Paddy family came and they bought the first piece of land there in 1734. They were shoemakers, and it was Seth Sr. that bought the piece of property, and I guess he was going to use it as a woodland. They were from England. The grandfather, Peter, came over from England to Virginia, left Virginia, came to Salem, Mass., and eventually into Haverhill, Massachusetts, which we were part of Haverhill, Mass. Back in those days before 1741. And we're like, I don't know of anybody Greek up there. We have a lot of history. It's possible the Paddies had somebody in the family that was Greek, but this person was Greek ancestry. He's like, oh, that's cool. So that brought up, and that was those 2 pieces that were tested, and they were related, and they were from different parts of the body. We think it was the same person, So we're thinking, well, did a dog drag a bone up here and gnaw on it? But they were from 3 different parts of the body. The nearest cemetery is about a mile away, so we don't think that's the case, Just kind of ruling out different things. So we decided we had to
Right.
have it carbon. So we had it carbon dated at the same laboratory we started using in 1967. They had moved to, I think, Tewksbury, Massachusetts from Cambridge, Mass. And my dad actually dealt with the owner, Dr. Harold Kruger, back then. He died in the 90s, and his son Dana's doing all the work now. But Dana, I called him up. I said, "No, I get these bones. We had them DNA'd, 2 out of the 3. The 3rd one's in safekeeping. We'll have it on display at our museum." I said, "However, they've been out of the ground for 90 years almost." He goes, "That shouldn't be a problem. If you have collagen and protein," and he did the DNA on it. I said, "Having them exposed to the elements doesn't hurt carbon dating?" He goes, "No, it's actually better to have them out of the ground because they would probably decompose, probably be gone by now, But anyway, he goes, "Yeah, I think we can do it." So we brought down 1 sample because it's about $700 for that test. And, so we decided to do 1 of them. I brought down the 2 that were DNA. I left the 3rd one, not that one we weren't going to do because we hadn't DNA'd it, but he said, okay, I'll take this one here. So he chose 1 of them, and he said, I can't do it here. I do conventional carbon dating. There's not enough carbon or mass in this bone. And he goes, in 1968, we couldn't have done it either. Mass accelerated spectrometry has taken place since 1968. I forget the year that came in. He goes, but I don't do that here. I'll prepare it. I'll send it to the University of Arizona in Tucson, and they'll do it there. So he prepared it. It took a little while for him. He had a lot of other things going on. He sent it down there eventually, and I guess 4 months went by, and we found out that it wasn't ancient, but it was from 1690 up to about 1900. The medium date was about 1850. We're like, okay, so it's not ancient. It's a Greek person. And then we thought, why is this Greek person decomposing on bedrock in the site where the Paddy family is still around that area? You don't want this. Why would you leave a person out back of your house, basically on bedrock, unburied, So it doesn't make a lot of sense to us. So we came up with all sorts of, little, imaginative ideas of what happened there, So yes, we have done DNA at the site. We don't have bone that goes back, at least that we know of, going back to 3,000 or 4,000 years. I will say the V hut looks like the wedge tombs of Ireland that we use for burial. The east-west chamber, again, looks like a tomb that they used in Western Europe. It would be nice if we had the soil conditions that would preserve that. However, I will say also the east-west chamber did have dirt in it in the 1920 photographs. The whole site had debris, some dirt, and Goodwin did a lot of cleaning of brush, and then they began excavating, sifting, for artifacts. They cleaned out the east-west chamber. And even, I think, back almost 50 years ago, we realized if he hadn't done that, even back in the 70s, I think we could have taken a sample out of that chamber. We don't know where the dirt was because he took it out, cleaned it, and just, put the dirt aside, I guess. That dirt could be analyzed. And if that was a burial, they could check it for chemicals. And certain chemical traces would indicate in the dirt that, yes, at one time, a human body was here. we didn't have that because they cleaned it right down to the bedrock. So that was kind of a loss of
Gotcha.
information. So that's kind of a problem, you know. There
Yeah.
is something called protein analysis, and you can actually, if you have an arrowhead and it goes into a animal, a human, and it has a little crack in it, like a microfissure, and you can say it went into my body, and some of the blood from my body got into that little, you know, that little crack. And maybe this happened a few thousand years ago. I was living way back then. They could today extract that. I guess even that minute amount of what that material that was once blood, they can check it. They can tell what type of animal it was. They can tell going back to 11,000 years, the time period. So the sacrificial table, if that was ever used for that purpose, we have no idea. I think it's a ceremonial table, and if it was sacrificial, you know, how do we prove it? Unless we know the cultural practices, or there are a lot of cracks on that rock, particularly underneath it. I mentioned it to Pat Hume. She had one of her assistants, I guess, from New Hampshire Archaeological Society up about 5 or 6 years ago, and I asked her, I said, protein analysis, could we do it at the table? She goes, well, the top of the table in your first photographs, it's been exposed to the elements. That probably won't work. You can't, you know, it's best to be covered over with dirt to protect it. The other possibility is the bottom of the table also has all these cracks because it's all foliated bedrock. That big slab that weighs almost 9,000 pounds, if you look under it, it's got all these cracks. I'm wondering at some future date, maybe somebody can come in there very carefully. If blood was on that table, if it ever was, it would go over the table, it would run down that little runnel, and then it probably would actually go into the bottom of the rock somewhat. Maybe a little bit of it got into a crack. That would be interesting. You know, I don't know how they extract that from the crack. Do they have to damage the table to get it out of there underneath? I don't know. So that's a possibility too with that technology. And they could say, yeah, we have a sample of blood. It's from an animal or whatever, and it's this type of animal or person, and it's this old. You know, that would be interesting. So it's a possibility, especially underneath the table. It was protected because when Goodwin first came, the table was buried up to the very bottom, and then he cleaned it down. So for 90 years, the bottom of it's been clean. So whether that would work underneath the table, it's not exposed to the sunlight. I really don't know, you know, but maybe someday they could do that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. But at any rate, there's a bone out there from about the 1700s, late
Yeah,
1600s, that
yeah,
is from the Mediterranean basin.
exactly. Yeah. So we got somebody of Greek ancestry, and you know, they were on the hilltop for some reason, and they were from, you know, the two that were DNA, they were related, the same person or a very, very close relationship. And there were 3 different parts of the body that these bones came from. So it sounds like it was a body that was left there. It wasn't some dog dug up a grave somewhere and dragged up a bone to the hill kind of thing. So yeah,
Right.
we have been using DNA too. So we're trying to use all the latest technology that we can use on the site.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Awesome. Well, let's look at some pictures here, and I want to get your information on them, Dennis.
Sure.
So let me share my screen here real quick, and then you can just tell me if you see them. Okay, Dennis, are you seeing that?
Uh, Now, okay, it's just coming up now. Yeah. So that picture there is near the watch house. The watch house would be behind where the photograph was taken to the right. We're actually looking up what we call the double wall path. And this double wall path continues up probably about 200 feet. It goes to a ridge where there was a chamber that was knocked down in the 1948, not 38 hurricane, but 48, when Mr. Goodwin was still alive and Malcolm Pearson was still around. There was actually a chamber on top of that ridge. And then you go down to a well called the lower well, and then you take a 90-degree turn and you go to the main site. So that's a double wall path. And that is kind of running east and west. If you go to the other side of the hill, there's actually a double wall path that comes in from the northwest, and it goes right to the southwest. And these two paths converge in the main site near a stone called the Gatepost Slab. It's thought that this was a processional path. You know, I mean, Paddy could have used it. He was a shoemaker. He had some domesticated animals. But this wall on the right part of it, behind the camera where this picture was taken, is where they got the 1,400-year-old date on that wall. So Paddy had domesticated animals, but he wasn't a farmer per se. So this may have been a sacred way, a pathway to the main site for the people that went there, perhaps on certain days. So we think, although Patty could have used this for some of his animals, we think it was an ancient pathway marked by these two rows of stones. And out of sight on the left of above is actually another one of those orthostats, the big, kind of a rectangular slab of stone that was removed from the bedrock, stood on its edge. And these are all over the hilltop like that. Farmers generally didn't do that. They didn't go in quarry slabs unless you used a gatepost slab or steps for the house, or even some barn foundation, house foundation. You can see all the drill marks. These stones don't have any of those modern drill marks in them. They're all done without the star drill and the plug and feather and all of that. But they have lit these stones on the edge. Seems to be something that the ancient people did for some reason. We call them orthostats. The east-west chamber, by the way, has orthostats, but has roof slabs on top of them. No.
Right. It's interesting because as I was out there, I looked at this really for quite a long time. And this is a lot of what you see right here, these stone walls, right? But
Mm.
nonetheless, it does seem
Mm.
to, I agree that it seems ceremonial in nature. Like there's almost an initiate or a candidate who's going on a journey, so to speak, a spiritual journey, if you will, through this. But there were a lot of these little walls that were up here, right? Not actually enclosures,
Yeah.
but like you put it, pathways, I think is a great way of putting it. And
If you look at my diorama when you come in the building, you'd see that the walls run all over. They turn, they twist, they bend. They're all over the hilltop. Where farmers' walls usually covered a big, broad area, and they were just getting rid of rocks from the fields that came up each year in the spring. They used these walls for stock fences, boundaries in some cases, and just basically a place to put rocks. They had New England just loaded with rocks. They wanted to get rid of them for farm, agricultural reasons, So these walls
right.
aren't like that. There are many on the 106 acres, and they go all over the place. They don't have any real rhyme or reason, and some of them are the serpentine walls. And that's the lower well I mentioned. I believe that's the lower well because we have an upper well. I think that's the lower one. As you went up that path you were just showing, and that's probably about 200 feet from where the. I
Yep.
think you probably took these pictures where you were standing. I think.
Yeah, I was. Yep. And my question is, and this on this is, was this well in your guys' estimation, is this part of the original stone works that were there?
They haven't dug this well, have not dug this well to the very bottom of it. They have attempted to in the past to see how far it goes down and what artifacts might be at the bottom. But it is very similar to wells that are found in North Stonington. They're at surface level. They're not built up. An animal could trip and fall into it as easy as a person. In fact, the author said that's one of the categories he had of the 25. He said, I almost walking through the woods actually almost fell into some of these wells. You just don't see them. And farmers generally built them up. They might put a wooden thing around it, which that could have had. I suppose there's no evidence of that. Or put a stone wall that goes up high because you don't want kids falling into these things. You don't want your pets. You don't want your if Patty's had some domesticated animals, you don't want them falling in there. So that's a very good question, Dave. But that's the lower well. There is one as you get into the main site we call the upper well. Our thought is that this well may be original. If I was a Patty family, I'd probably put a bucket in there and get water out of it. But until somebody goes to the bottom to see how deep this well is, and then what's at the bottom of it, when they did some work on it 40 years ago in the 1980s, we found a lot of stuff from our visitors. People threw things into it as they walked by, whether it was pennies or other things into it. A lot of historical things, including, I think, the old pop on the aluminum cans of Pop Tarts, tops, I should say, that were in there, and bottle caps and all sorts of stuff. But that's only like at I think the 14-foot level or whatever it was. And again, we need to go to the bottom of that. I'm wondering if ground penetration radar, next time we have it, we can hold it over there and whether she can see the depth of that with the ground penetration radar. A woman named Doria, she's been coming up since 2020 also, so she's been involved with the
Yeah,
OSL thing and all of that. So it's a good question, but it's in the
absolutely.
middle of the double wall path. If you have animals herding along there, you certainly don't want them falling into the well. I mean, you don't want to have your animal break their leg or anything like that,
Right.
uh, unless you put a wooden thing around it. But there's no stonework around it to prevent anybody from falling in that. And we have a chain link fence around that too. So we had a cover with a chain link fence with the wood, and then we had the chain link fence 4 foot tall, whatever it is, to keep people from falling in that today. But it's right in the middle of a double wall path. And by the way, it's right next to a swamp, and it's also next to the south wall, which we determined in the 1970s during the survey work. It's a true south wall. It goes through if you went north, it goes through the North Stone, the monolith called the North Stone, probably about 500 or 600 feet away. But we just more recently realized that south wall has a 90-degree bend with a boulder, and then it has a big stone, natural glacial boulder about halfway through that wall. And then the wall seems to go underground a little bit. It comes back up and it's split into a big kind of a D-shaped opening at the end. The wall's kind of shaped like that. We think it's another serpent. And on the north side, it's a 90-degree bend with a boulder. I've been looking at that since I've been a kid. Why do they waste their time? It's only a short section that's 90 degrees, like, 7 feet or 8 feet. Why did they do that with this big boulder here? It bends 90 degrees and then heads south. And then as you head south towards the chain link fence, there's a big glacial boulder there. That's kind of cool. And then you go further south, the wall kind of goes down. It disappears into the ground a little bit, and then it comes back up into this Y. I think the boulder is the tail with a 90-degree bend, because you find several of these here and elsewhere across the landscape of New England and beyond. These serpents can have like a 90-degree tail. And we have, I think, 2 or 3 at the site that had that 90-degree tail. The boulder being halfway through the body, we've seen that in Connecticut too. Either that or they built the wall wider, and we have one of those at our site too, just the smaller rocks built wider. I thought today could that represent pregnancy, or could that represent the serpent ate something, like its prey?
Oh,
And then
very
it goes,
interesting.
and then it goes to and then it goes further south to that big Y. And my buddy from
Yep.
West Virginia, he's my publicist, gives me a lot of radio shows, Mark Eddy. He sent me a picture of one from Kentucky. And the Kentucky is a stone wall. It's shaped like a serpent. In 1990, an archaeologist, a lady, was actually working on that back then. I'm surprised it didn't make the headlines, but a lot of this stuff does not. And she has this stone wall serpent in Kentucky with a wide mouth. The Great Serpent Mountain in Ohio, again, does have a wide mouth with an egg in it. And I'm looking at that V shape at the end facing the swamp and that well you got there. It's just next to it. I'm like, and it kind of has like 2 stones marking what could be the end of the mouth on either side. I think I got a wide mouth serpent facing true south, and it looks like it's going into the swamp. And one of the things that ceremonial stonework book by Mark and Starr in 2016 said about, he has 400 serpents, as I mentioned. Some of these serpents are coming out of the water, like swamps and ponds in North Stonehenge, and some are going into it. And this one appears to be heading south right for the swamp. And it also goes
Yeah,
underground a
right.
little bit. And I've had other researchers, including a guy named Doug. He's from Connecticut too. He's a friend of Mark Starr's. He tweeted Mark and Starr a lot on because Mark and Starr lived there for 30 years. He said, "Oh, these have been called farmers' walls and constructions." And when he met my friend Doug there, Doug was a member of NERA, kind of set him straight. Said, "Yeah, we know what farmers' walls look like. There's 240,000 miles of farmers' walls in New England. These walls are not that. These are a whole different thing. And we think these are ancient."
Right.
And then they started seeing the serpent walls. But I think we have a wide-mouthed serpent kind of heading south, and it's on the true north-south alignment. Its tail is actually kind of, the body actually before the 90-degree bend is facing the North Stone. It goes right through the astronomical platform where there are 2 columns that mark all the astronomical alignments, and they're true north and south of each other, both columns. They were destroyed by Goodwin back in the late 30s because he didn't know what their purpose was. He thought they were part of the oracle chamber. They were not. He thought they were hollow, like beehive chambers, like you see in Ireland. These big kind of a beehive-shaped structure, almost igloo-shaped structure with a
Right.
core building in the roof. Like Newgrange has that inside too. Newgrange is amazing. The far end with the crucifix, it's a gigantic, dome shape almost. But they weren't. And he decided to he thought they must have been discarded stones, like just a waste pile of rock. He just built part of the ramp by the sacrificial table. It needed some repairs. So he has tripods of wood, and we have the pictures of that with winch. And he's lifting up the rocks, rebuilding part of that platform there, overlooking the sacrificial table, the north end of it. And he destroyed the astronomical center by the late 30s. And it wasn't until the 70s we realized the error of his ways. It's the same, but he diagrammed them, and they're in his book. shows looking north. You see the table, oracle chambers on the right, and then you're looking beyond the table, and in the background, the diagram, the two dome structures there. And when we did all that survey work I mentioned over 5 years, we found that that was the astronomical center of the site. So that goes right down there to the North Stone. It goes through this, those two cairns, there were cairns, piles of rocks, and then it goes right into the south wall, and which is going towards a swamp, you know. So yeah, that area right
Yeah.
around that little well is kind of interesting, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about the well here, and let me go, the well looks like it was fed off of this little creek here, because the well is
Yeah,
back this way. And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
as a surveyor, right, and a guy who's done a lot of
Yeah.
construction layout, I was like, well, it looks like they're collecting water. I couldn't see an outflow on this well here, which tells me that they were allowing the water to kind of come in here, seek its own level, and then extract water out of it. I just found it interesting because it looks like water was being brought in from the outside of the area to the inside, which I just found was fascinating.
I
Let
think
me go
so. Yeah, I
to,
think that's right. Yeah.
oh, what's that? Sorry, Dennis.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I was just going to see if I could blow up the pictures a little bit big. Oh, I can. Okay, I can make them a little bigger, then I can see them better. Oh,
Yep.
yeah, that's pretty.
So this is one of the ones that really fascinated me. And this is what you've been alluding to here. So here we have like a compartment or a room that's built above ground, right? That you have all this rock that's been stacked up. Now, look, these,
Yeah.
as you were saying, this is bedrock, right? This is heavy rock. This is not something that's easy to move. And we're going to show some more of these here. But what chamber are we looking at here, Dennis?
No, that's kind of when you first enter the site, and on your right is the upper well, and that's the patty chamber. Oh, I'm sorry, my dog's talking. It's a patty chamber, and the patty chamber is. Oh, sorry about that. Sky, my dog Sky. She's talking at something, and I
It's all
apologize
good.
there. Yeah. So the patty chamber, yeah. So that chamber is facing south. It has a little bit of a window to the left of the entrance of the structure. It's kind of hard to see. It's like a little window there on the very, very left near the bottom. And it's not, yeah, go down right a little bit more to the left with your cursor. More to the left, more to the left, more to the left. Right about there. You see a little dark spot? That's one of the
Yep.
windows in a chamber. The chamber in ruins has a similar one on the same side, and it's facing the same direction. The chamber in ruins in the background, and the big roof slab is just visible. But yeah, right there, that's visible. That's a couple ton slab that fell into it. And that's one of the inscriptions, carbon datings we got. It faces south, and it has a window. And it also has a window on the north side of that chamber too. And I mentioned windows before, but these windows are similar to that, but they're actually in the stone walls themselves. And that wasn't found until 2016. My dad spent a lot of time looking at the walls all over the hill. Particularly towards the end of his life, he would go up there. And a little bit earlier, back in the about 25 years ago, Dr. Winkler from Penn State was coming up for a number of years. He was an archaeoastronomer, which is very valuable to us for the astronomy. And he would go out with my dad in the woods and look at the stone walls, and they would measure them, they would photograph them, and make comments. They never saw the serpentine shape in them, and neither did I back then. And they never saw the windows. And today we have 36 windows, but the windows are a little bit like that. But that's the Patty area, the Jonathan Patty family. And to the left of that chamber, we believe this chamber was built by the original builders. It's built out of bedrock, as you mentioned. There's a lot of flat stonework that came off the bedrock. That area right in there is, we think, was an ancient courtyard. And the Patty house is a wooden house, probably 2-story tall, about 20 by 40, sat on that courtyard, and they put a wall in the middle of the courtyard to support the middle of the house. Today, people use lolly columns, those metal posts with cement in them. They stand them up in the cellar to help support your house. They just used a stone wall right there, and they built that out of smaller stones than what the original builders did. And why the Patties chose this, I think, maybe because the courtyard served as a foundation. It saved them building a foundation. That's a lot of work, digging a cellar hole and what have you. They owned the land going back to 1741. They had bought the first piece of property there. 1734. That was Seth. And then in 1744, they bought another piece of property that included this site. And then in the 1750s, when Salem, New Hampshire was incorporated, you start to see houses going up. And the Patties are pretty well known in Salem. In fact, Patties, later in time, Patties worked on the trolley system in Salem, you know. But Jonathan was a shoemaker. He was a road surveyor. He was a tax collector around 1800 for 3 years. So he collected taxes. He had 2 sons. He had 11 daughters, a lot of kids. And he also got involved with the town paupers. He would put a bid into the town of Salem. I have the book, 1837, all handwritten back to 31. And Jonathan and other people would put a bid in with the town. And Jonathan won, I guess if you want to say, the lottery, as well as a couple other people were also winners, if you will. And they took in the town paupers, or poor people, and they did that for 6 years. The people that couldn't take care of themselves any longer. And he had up to 11 of them, I believe, in his house at one time. So when his children, he had like 13 kids. By the time they all moved away, empty nesters, he had room in his house, I guess, for these paupers. And like one year, he made like $360 or something, which probably in the 30s was quite a bit of money. By
Yeah.
1837 was his last year to do that. And by 38, he no longer did that. The town of Salem, I guess, had built a poor farm too. So I'm not sure that anybody could put bids in anymore, but he did not do that any longer. But he did start getting involved with taking in slaves. He was an abolitionist. So he was a station master, part of the slaves moving north towards Canada, one of the many stops along the way. So this
Gotcha.
also served historic. So you can imagine a wooden house sitting over there, you know. That house today, we believe, is down on Havel Road, the road that where our parking lot goes into. It's our main road. Across the street is a house that in 1907, the history of Salem came out by Edgar Gilbert. In a picture from the 1890s has the whole Patty family standing in front of that house. What we think is the house, they took down the chimney, they took out probably windows, furniture, they moved the house, and there's a road that goes from this site right down the hill, right in front of that house is sitting today. And that house is sitting down there, and apparently this house was brought down there and it got damaged by fire around 1903 or something, because Edgar Gilbert said a few years ago the house burnt, was damaged by fire, and then they had to, rebuild it. The story became, we think later on, is that Jonathan Patty died in 1849. In 1855, his house burnt down on the hill. We think that's a messed up or mixed up history of the thing, because it's right in Edgar Gilbert's book. So we think the house is not burnt here, because they said the archaeologists that worked on this, like Goodwin, Frank Lynn, and other people, never found enough ash or charred wood or anything to indicate a whole house was consumed there. It doesn't make any sense. This is years ago, you know. And looking at the book a little closer, Edgar Gilbert, because we have several copies of the history of Salem, it looks like the house was brought down the street. It sat on the foundation for a short, probably 1863, because that's when the Patty family sold the property to a guy named Nathaniel H. Paul for 28 years. Nathaniel H. Paul used it as a woodlot, and he had a sawmill down the street at Cowbell Corner. So it goes out of the Patty family for 28 years. And we think before that happened, they moved the house down there. And where the house sits today was one time the Dow Tavern, D-O-W, the Dow family tavern. And that burnt down there. That actually got destroyed by fire, I guess. So this house was brought down the hill to sit where that makes sense, because if you look at the history, especially in New England, they were moving around houses, carriage houses, meeting houses. Every time you look at, we have a show called Chronicle in New Hampshire on our local ABC affiliate. We've been on it many times. And they have a gentleman on there named Fritz Weatherby. He'll get into some of this. He goes, that old schoolhouse used to be in another part of town. That church was over here. They moved it. They added on to it. The carriage, it goes on and on like that. So this house was brought down the hill, we think. It was set up over there in 1863, roughly. And then it burnt around 1903 or 02. And then they repaired it, and it sits there today. But
Okay.
actually, a
Well,
guy named Ebenezer Dustin bought the property. He was a Patty family member, and then it goes to back to another Patty, and then it goes to Fred Dustin, and then it goes to William Goodwin. So the almost 200 years of Patty's involvement, except for that 28 year with the lumberman, So
right. And so the Patty family had built a structure up here using some of these old walls
Yeah,
as kind of a foundation. Then they later moved
exactly.
the house down the hill.
We think so. Exactly. Yep. So
Okay,
one thing we found out with
but
LiDAR.
now
Oh, go ahead.
hang tight real quick, Dennis.
Sure, sure.
Is there any indication that this structure here was built by the Patty family at all?
We think it's original. There's no, it's got the same style, big stone slabs, no drill marks in the original stonework. We think it's original. Patty may have used it as a root cellar because inside of it, you can see where some cement, it's the only structure up there, he kinked the cement into the walls to probably to make it more watertight or weatherproof it. And he might have kept some of his vegetables because his house sat over that. Usually root cellars were generally, but not always, inside of houses. I saw one down in Virginia near the natural, what do they call it, Natural Bridge, beautiful place. There, we stayed at a beautiful place down there. And I looked in the backyard and I asked the owner, what is that? He goes, that's a root cellar. And I went down and looked at it and it was outside, separate from the house. But in New England, because of the winters and everything, a lot of these root cellars are underneath cellars. I think that's an ancient chamber. It's of the same style as the other structures, but the Patty family chinked some water into the wall, and I think it was just to make it more watertight, airtight, or whatever. You do want to have root cellars that do have ventilation, though. That's one thing, and that little window may have served as that. So I think it is an ancient structure. The Patty house sat over it. Actually, right on top of that roof was actually a fireplace hearth made out of brick. So he put his house right over that whole thing, utilizing that chamber, I'm sure, for probably storing some of his, his vegetables or something for winter. But I think it's an original chamber, and the chamber in
Gotcha.
ruins
So
is kind of on the other. Yeah,
it was an original chamber that he found and then repurposed.
I think it made it. Yeah, it's probably one of the things that drew him to this. Besides owning the land, like, hey, we got a foundation here, we can modify it, put a house over it. We got a chamber here we can use for root cellar. It's already here. And what you can't see, where you're standing, there's more roof slabs to another structure just opposite that one. There's a couple roof slabs, and I think in the foreground you can see the outline of a square kind of square or right-angled wood. That's part of the
Mhm.
upper well. I think that's the upper well. The bottom of that upper well is 23 feet down, and that's where they found the quartz crystals in 1963. There's no water that goes into it from a spring. It's all rainwater and snow melt. It's 23 feet deep. It's bigger at the bottom than the top. My dad cleaned it out in 63. The project was started in 61. And when you get to the bottom, they found these beautiful quartz crystals, which are on display in our building today. I thought that might be a mine shaft because, again, the only water that goes in there is when it rains, and it's dry most of the year, and there's only a thin
Gotcha.
wall between it and the Patty cellar. But just behind that, where that well is, there's a screen on where that wood is actually another part of a chain link fence, kind of keep people from falling. There is a fence too there, and then it has that over the top, just as additional protection for people and animals, if you will, and to keep people from throwing things down there too. But there is a structure to the left you can't see, and it has two big, gigantic roof slabs. And you pointed out one up there where the chamber and ruin is. There's one just to the left of that that's on its edge too. We think there are two large chambers here at one time. The Patties probably cannibalized the one on the left. There's a closet that was where the inside of it was. The closet's still in perfect shape, a stone closet. And they actually probably used some of the stones to help, build that foundation in the middle for support. I will say the
Right.
LiDAR we started using, the handheld LiDAR in 2020 by Tom Elmore. He was the first one to do LiDAR on the site. He went into these chambers with his LiDAR. It's a $50,000 unit, and it's high resolution. That you can see down to a centimeter. What he found out is inside that chamber, he went into the chamber in ruins with a fallen roof slab. That was very difficult for him. And but what we found out once we got all of the data all processed, it took him a month or so because he's a landscape architect and he's doing a lot of work. He had to do this on the side kind of. And when he came back and he showed us his almost a terabyte of information, you can see actually the plan view on the LiDAR. And what we're finding is that the floor plan of the Patty chamber, the chamber in ruins, and the what we think was a courtyard that Patty's house sat over that we've been talking about are all trapezoidal in shape. They're not rectangular. The groove on top of the sacrificial table we found out in 2016 Conversation came up about that with late David Stewart Smith, and it's been called a rectangle forever. So I went up and really carefully measured it, and it actually is 9 inches narrower at the top, the groove is, than the bottom. It's actually a rectangular shaped groove, not a, I mean, a trapezoidal shaped groove, not a rectangular shape. And
Wow.
then there's a little alcove near the sacrificial table too. It has 2 niches in it. It's an open air structure, no roof on it that we know of ever. I mean, it could have. There's just no indication today. That is trapezoidal in shape. So we have four structures of the trapezoidal shape, and then we have the groove on the table. Chamber in Plastow, New Hampshire, I may have mentioned it's like a single chamber over about 10 miles from this site. We've known about it since the 60s at least. People knew about it way back when, but my family became more aware of it, I think, in the 60s when we first visited it. But we did it last year, and we did some measuring in it and found out it's a trapezoidal shape too. And it has a core belt roof right along the longitudinal axis. And I was just looking at the New Hampshire chamber, which I was there 26 years ago. And I was looking at the sketches of that, and that thing has a core belting along the longitudinal axis too. Core belting's that inverted staircase kind of thing. The oracle chamber has it on the east wing. It looks like an archway, where these chambers here, like the one in like the patty chamber, actually the walls go up straight, and then the roof slab sits on it, so it's kind of vertical construction with flat slabs. But these chambers have big slabs on them too, but as you go up the walls and the sides, the walls curve inward. That's called core belting. An extreme example of that would be a beehive chamber in Ireland, and we have some of those in New
Right.
England too. And the inside of Newgrange, as I mentioned, the Upton Chamber in Massachusetts, they both look the same. We've been to both. The one in Ireland, Newgrange, I think it's 14 feet tall. The one in Massachusetts in Upton that Malcolm Pearson's family owned before he had this site is actually 10 feet by 10 feet. It looks like a gigantic igloo shape with a 14-foot entrance. And so it's got core belting in there too. So that is found in 1969. The white paint you'll see in the rock indicates man-made cutouts and carvings. That has a kind of a triangle. It's a little hard to see there, but that hole isn't perfectly round. It's actually triangular shape. And then the groove outside the white paint, the circle, actually is a groove that's been crudely cut into the stone. And in 1969, they were doing some cleaning there, and they discovered that. Some people called it a sundial. Put a little stake in there, it would cast a shadow. That was just a thought. We have no idea what this thing is for. It doesn't seem to be any kind of purpose for grinding or anything like that, because the rock is very rough. And that triangular hole, we have a couple of them on the site. It
I was
might
gonna
be where
say
they use.
I saw these all over the place out there. I was curious
Yeah.
about them.
Most of them are perfectly round, and you see half of it. You use a star drill, and once they put a couple of these across one of the slabs, all in line, they kind of perforate the slab. They'll put in these two tapered metal guides and then a wedge, and they would strike these back and forth, and you get a certain tone, and then the rock would eventually split. That technique started in the 1780s, from the best I can tell. The star drill and the plug and feather or wedge and feathers were started then. And we think this is during the Patty area, because when the Patties were here they sold the house in 1863. Sometime before that, they had quarrymen coming in and removing a great deal of the site. We think maybe a half of the site, it could be anywhere from a third to a half of the site's missing today. They were coming up, and the story goes, they were up there for 3 years in a row, probably seasonally, taking rock, cartload after cartload of rock away for other building projects. And Patty, being a tax man for a couple of years, knew some of the tax laws. There was a thing called a quarry tax, believe it or not. So if they came onto your property and actually quarried stone and paid you for it, there was a tax you had to pay. But if the stones were already loose, like these were already quarried by the ancient builders, you didn't have to worry about paying a little bit of that income. You have to keep it all, I guess, which is kind of nice when you can do that.
Right.
So the pelican feather, I think there's about 16 of those. But that's a good point too, David. If this site was all built by the Patty family or somebody in that area, you would have seen hundreds of these drill marks made with a star drill, and where they would set the plug and feather in on the roof slabs, wall slabs, the edge of the sacrificial table, the stone monoliths, the oracle stuff. You would see hundreds and hundreds of these markings if it was done during the Metal Age rather than the Stone Age, if you will. But you do see
Absolutely.
some of them from the quarrymen that were taking rocks away from the site. That's unfortunate. That does happen, though.
Absolutely. All right, let me find another one here. Bear
Sure.
with me. Okay. This is just, and I wanted to show this picture here to give people some idea. The thing that strikes me about this is these are very defined corners, right? Whoever
Yeah.
built this stuff really took time to get the angles correctly. And given the fact that it's definitely an a site that employs um, astro lines, the solstices, they have stones that mark those. I was curious if any of these structures, other than the stones that mark the solstice and the equinox themselves, do we know if any of these other buildings seem to be erected in in alignment with the stars or the solstices or anything like that, Dennis?
Well, the orientation of the structures on the site, mainly the walls, the structures, are generally in a north, south, east, and west at a true north orientation, generally speaking. Some of the entrances are facing south, some of them are facing east, and the oracle chamber was facing true west. The lintel stones are missing now. But yeah, and then we have as I mentioned, the watch house has the orientation towards the equinox sunrise illumination. So that's kind of cool too. Some of the other structures in New England are facing true south. The Plastow chamber is facing true, I believe it's true, I'm going to say west for sunset on the fall and spring equinox. And a couple other structures are facing the winter solstice alignment, like the Woodstock calendar 2 is facing winter solstice sunrise. And that's a really interesting. Vermont is loaded with these chambers. That's probably the most famous, called calendar 2 in Woodstock, Vermont, a beautiful town up there. We were there twice in the last couple of years, and we were there in '77 for the first time. But that direction there, you're looking opposite the Patty Chamber. You're looking south. You can see one roof slab still on the structure, and if you look a little further, you see a space, and then you see another roof slab. And that's actually a cool picture because that second roof slab that's kind of down, the edge of it, you can see has like a little ridge in it. That's actually a 90-degree cut. Somebody actually made a lap joint out of that stone. So that's like notched by somebody. There's no metal tools. David Stewart Smith is the one that brought it to our attention. We can look at these things for years. He came along in '78, sometime after 1978. He mentioned that. He goes, that stone there has slipped down. It actually supposed to be against that stone on top, the higher one. On the far side of that upper one, yeah, just on the opposite edge though, just opposite that down towards where the opening is, that stone that slipped down with that notch on the edge of it, it's a lap joint. It actually fits, and you measured it and everything, it actually would fit together. So those stones are actually joined together with that lap joint. And that stone, for some reason, has fallen down, not where it originally was supposed to. It's just an odd thing. We really don't know what this chamber is. It's so different than the other ones. But it does consist of two big slabs of stone. And again, one of them kind of fell to the south, if you will. The one you're pointing at is still in its original place from what we know. And you're kind of looking in the direction of the lower well and the swamp area. We were talking about a little bit area. That's kind of beyond that picture, probably about 100 feet. And to the left of the arrow is where the upper well was. So, and if we turned around the camera right now, we'd be looking back into the Patty Chamber. So.
Right. I was curious. Yeah, no, that answers my question. Because I was curious about this. I'm like, it just seemed kind of like a strange place just to have like a rock walkway. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And it
it's
made
a
me,
roof slab. Yeah.
yep, absolutely.
And if you
Okay,
put the
let's
arrow
move.
back, if you put the arrow back in the middle, go down a little bit, maybe down a couple inches. Right there is where that lip is. Right along that ridge there, left and right of your arrow, is that lap joint. And that whole stone should come towards us and up, and it would actually touch that top stone there on the other side. They actually would interlock, actually. And that's the only one we know of on the site, unless the Oracle Chamber roof has that and it's under dirt. We can't see it. So they actually created lap joints, like you do when you, like we did our cabin up in Winnipesaukee. We had, I think it was called, what do they call it, strip lap or whatever? Kind of the same thing, the wood actually goes together like a puzzle almost, they fit into each other, That's what that rock did. It actually
Gotcha.
should be brought up and towards us, yeah.
Few years back, I started to get the feeling that we, as fundamentalists and Orthodox Mormons, we need our own stuff. Up to now, we've been able to buy and purchase all of our scriptures, books, art, and music from other restoration organizations. And that's been good, but there's no guarantee it's going to remain that way. Also, it can be a bit tricky as you scour the internet trying to find all the books from your favorite fundamentalist or Orthodox Mormon authors. As I thought about this, I feel like I was really given a solution. Now, through the hard work of others, because let's face it, I'm the guy least qualified in all the world to build a website, I'm happy to present to you 1830mercantile.org. Right now on the website, you can see that we have all the books that have ever been written by 4 authors, including names like Drew Briney and Ogden Kraut. Also, very soon there will be a link to buy art and music, all produced by Mormons with a deep love for the restored gospel. There's also places for you to get free resources where you can find podcasts, videos, classes, and other presentations. Also, coming very soon, there will be a place for events where you can list the events from your organization so that you can get the most out of that attendance. Now, this can be as big as you want it to be. It's all up to you guys out there if you want to buy and post things on here. Now, if you're someone who produces something that you feel like others can benefit from, 1830 Mercantile is a place where you can make all of those products available for purchase. All you need to do is drop me an email at mormonrenegade@gmail.com and put 1830 in the title of that email with a short message, and either myself or someone else from the 1830 Mercantile team will reach out to you so we can get your product up there on the site. Now, to make sure that all the products that we offer are affordable and to ensure that the vast majority of the profits go to the producer, the website percentage is only 3 to 4% of the total cost. And that's just so I can pay the pros that have created this website and keep the lights on the website itself. Finally, by making some of your purchases at 1830mercantile.org, you will be supporting folks whose principles and morals are close, if not the same as yours, at the same time, not giving your money away to people who stand against everything you stand for. So, no matter if you're looking to make a purchase or you're a seller that wants to get your products listed, head on over to 1830mercantile.org today, drop me an email, and we'll make sure that we get back out to you. Now, back to the show.
That's the joint, right? I mean, that whole right along the left and right, as you can see a shadow. That's
So those
actually the joint.
So your thought
Pretty
is
cool.
those were grooves that would interlock with other stones. Is that kind of what you're
Actually,
thinking?
it is, and it's more like a 90-degree cut. Actually a 90-degree cut. It's kind of hard to see it in that photograph, but the whole left and right along that whole edge that's facing us has actually been notched. It's actually a notch in there, and when you bring that up, that notch will actually interlock with that top stone on the far side of it that you can't really see. So it's kind of
Gotcha.
cool. Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that is cool. All right,
yeah,
let's move on.
yeah,
Let's move on here.
yeah.
What is what we can see like this shape here, this shape here. I was fascinated by those. What's your theory on what those are there, Dennis?
Yeah. Oh, great question. Yeah, we have several of those. One shaped like a chicken, one shaped like an apple, another one shaped like a wine bottle. That one right there you're looking at, that actually is the top of that stone that has that lap joint, which is out of sight. It's on the top of the stone, and if you could move the camera, you can't do it, but if you went around that chain link fence on the other side and look back, you'd see that lap joint right there. You're looking at the Patty Chamber again direction, but that smile with the paint, that's paint we put on there. That's a tool sharpening groove. That's a little different than the other ones you just showed me. That's actually, they put something in there, maybe a deer antler, they might have put a stone tool in there. And why would they do that on a roof of a chamber unless it was a later group of people, that used the site for something different and they were sharpening a tool? And you see the circle on the left, that's the one you're looking at previously with a hole in it. So those were both found in 1969, and there was dirt on top of them. So the dirt was removed during an excavation, and we kept them clear
Okay.
since then. Now, the other ones you're looking at actually have different shapes. That one there, it's kind of a rounded shape. But if you look right where the arrow is right now, where it comes out, there's actually a groove. And that groove is similar to the groove on the sacrificial table at the very bottom of the groove on the sacrificial table. The groove on the table looks to be, 2 or 3 inches wide, maybe a little bit more, and about an inch deep. If you look at the groove on the table at the very bottom, there's a fine little groove on this one too. It's the same shape at the very bottom of the groove on the table as the groove there. There's, like I say, several of these, wine bottle, chicken shape, kidney shape. This one's just kind of a round one. They all have those little runnels. I talked to a guide over in Malta back in '97 when we visited Malta, and they had the same thing over there like those. And I said, what were they? What's the idea of these little basins with these little runnels or grooves? He goes, I thought today, 5,000 something years after this site was, built, 5,500 years or whatever. He goes, our belief, our tradition is that these were used where they would pour fluid. It could be blood. It could be something like, I don't know, they probably had wine back then or something like that. He goes, it was an offering to the gods for fertility. So the soil, this would go into you'd pour it on the bedrock or whatever, and then it would go away or whatever. It was supposed to be an offering to the gods, he thought, and for fertility. And this goes back to 1997 when we visited us. But we have the same thing up in New Hampshire, and we have several of them. They're in bedrock. They're on our site, which we think is a ceremonial site. We see no other purpose, and they actually have shapes. I mentioned the wine bottle shape. They have the apple shape. We have the kidney shape, the chicken shape, and that one there, which is kind of just rounded, I guess. So, and I think you had another one in there too, another picture Dave saw like that too. Maybe it was the next.
So, Dennis, let me ask you this question, and we'll get back to the sacrificial table in a minute, because this groove right here, I had noticed that too, is that's
Yeah,
oddly familiar as something we'll see on the sacrificial table, like if it was
right,
wine or like blood, whatever it was supposed to be that drained
right.
off of there. You can see it coming off the sacrificial table where it would drip on the ground. My question
Mm-hmm.
is, has there been any excavation here to see what's beneath this, right? Because on the sacrificial table, you have that exit groove, so to speak, that would spill
Yeah.
on the ground. My question is what's below here? Has there been any
Yeah.
excavation to take a look at that?
Actually, I think that was probably cleared. I was there since I've been a kid in the '50s, but I think in '70 I became a guide and spending a little more time there while they were doing work and stuff. My thought is around 19. We probably had the report on that. I think James Woodall. I think probably he did excavations in that area. That may have been uncovered. It's near the Patty, where the Patty House sat. It's not too far from there. I think he was excavating all along there, and I think he actually left that uncovered. I think that could have been found in 1970. Where you pointed out, it's basically you're looking at all solid bedrock. There's really nothing below it but more rock that goes down for miles. So that is solid, and all of these were made on solid bedrock except for one. The wine bottle shaped one is actually sitting on another big slab that was quarried and set, and that's a mystery in itself. It's part of an underground drain system. And also the quarrymen were in there removing stonework from that area, so we really don't know what it's originally looked like, but that's the exception. This is on bedrock. The wine bottle one, if it comes up in your picture, is actually sitting on a rock, on top of rock, not bedrock. The rock was part of bedrock at one time, but it's part of a drain. The drain goes underneath it, and it's manufactured, it's artificial, if you will. So, but in Old Malta, they say they were used for, for religious purposes, as an offering place, a libation bowl, I guess they used to call them, libation. So Barry Fell referred to it as a libation bowl too. He was the guy that was working on the inscriptions. He died in 1994. He came to us in 1975 for the first time. He worked on inscriptions, but things like this he was interested in too. He did a lot of comparative archaeology with old world sites to new world sites, sites like ours compared to other Northeast sites, comparing, regionally and also, I guess, internationally, I guess.
Awesome. All right, let me move
Yeah.
on to some more here. So,
Yeah.
what
Oh,
is
that's a
this
cool. Well, that's called the south facing chamber. It's actually facing the well, the swamp, where
Mhm.
we were a little while ago. And it is, well, that chamber there is called the lilac chamber. There are lilacs that were planted there. That's a state flower, by the way. But the Patty family, we think Mrs. Patty or somebody might have planted those there almost 200 years ago. It's on the roof of that structure. A couple of years ago, people were mentioning to me this structure, usually back at the visitor center, they come down, I enjoyed our tour, and they'd mention this structure, and they say, do you see like a turtle, a turtle snake or something to it? I'm like, is it an inscription? They go, no, it's like a snake. I'm like, a turtle, huh? I said, and it's a south-facing chamber. This picture, if it was taken just a little bit further back, if you will, include a little bit more on the left and right. I can't see quite the left and right part of it. So it won't be unfortunate because, but in any event, I went up with my dog. We live on a cul-de-sac abutting this property, which is nice. And we have access to the property through some of the walls that are out here which we think are ancient. We have monoliths right in my backyard. As a matter of fact, if my camera worked, I'd send you a picture of the monolith in my backyard. It's an intersection of basically three walls with a slab. It's interesting. It looks like a monolith. Monoliths can have a phallic fertility symbol, and it looks like a female stone stood up next to it, if you will. And this is in Vermont. It happens too, and in New York. But I have it right in my backyard, and my backyard is America's Stonehenge, 106 acres. We were lucky enough to buy a property next to this on a cul-de-sac in 1985. We built a house in 86, 87 here. So I walk my dog up there every night, keep an eye on the place, and I've been meaning to get some nice photographs for radio shows like I'm doing right now to get to my host. It was a cloudy day, no shadows. I went up, took a picture like that, kind of just a little bit further back, and I'm looking at it going, oh my God, I can see it. What they were looking at is a profile. This structure may have been designed to look like a turtle. And again, this picture here, people look at it and go, I don't, because part of it's missing. The head would be
Hold
to
on,
the left.
a turtle?
If you
Is
have
that what you said?
a turtle shaped profile, yeah. It'd be more, yeah, it's kind of cut. A nice photograph, but it cuts out part of the left side of it, and it cuts out the tail end of it. The left side of it, we think, is the head. You go up by the lilacs, you can see the hump where the stonework is. That's the top shell of the turtle.
Where the
You can see
shell, the kind of the top of the shell,
yeah.
so so they
And
made
then,
this
and
stone effigy of a turtle,
possibly, yeah.
and then had a compartment inside.
Right, yeah. And that compartment actually has a
Interesting.
lintel. You can see the lintel where your cursor is. That actually would be the belly of the turtle. And if you go to the left side of the opening and the right side of the opening, and again, this picture's just a little bit off, you have to look at it just a slight. You'll see those are the legs on either side of the opening. And yeah, there. And then the other one's on the other side is the leg too. And again, we're missing the head. And then to the right, on the bottom right, you might be able to partly see it when you go just a little higher, Dave, just a little, right, you're right on it, go down about just a tiny bit down, just down with your cursor. The rock you're on right now, you just see the edge of it. It looks like a tail. And I looked at that thing since the 50s, and my eyes were not looking at a turtle, they're just looking at a chamber. I got back and looked at it, and once you see it, you'll never not see it. Every time I go up there, I'm seeing a turtle. It's a profile. And again, unfortunately, a picture's good, but it's cutting out the head, it's cutting out the tail, and there is a slightly different angle of that. It's probably why we missed this thing. And it's like, oh my God, I can see it. And then you say to yourself, was this intentional, or am I seeing things like, I think pareidolia is the word when you see faces in clouds, or you see animal shapes in clouds, that kind of thing. But when you really look at this thing, it's easy to see why we didn't see it. But once you see it, and turtles were big in ancient cultures, particularly Native American, and serpents too. So we don't know to this day. This is only a couple of years ago. We actually kind of, if you will, discovered this. And it was actually our visitors that really brought it to our attention. And we look at it now and go, oh my God. And most people, I would say 9 out of 10 people stand back, go, oh my God, I can see it. Maybe 1 out of 10 goes, I don't quite, and they have to look for a while. And that's probably like me for years. And I'm like, oh, now I see the turtle shape. So is it intentional? Is it just some coincidence? But if you had the whole thing in the picture, people would go, oh, because we're seeing just a part of it. You can't really, you got to see the whole thing to really see, oh, that is like a turtle,
So
That's
real
kind of
quick,
cool.
and Dennis, I don't expect you to buy into this. I'm talking more to the viewers now, knowing that you're not from my religious persuasion, if you will. But in Mormonism, there was a group of people called the Jaredites who came
Hmm.
over about 2,200 years BC, right? So you're talking that 4,000 years ago, and the
Right.
boats
Yeah.
that they
Yeah.
came in on were oddly enough shaped like turtles.
No kidding. Well, that's
No
interesting
kidding.
too. I've heard of that group too. I have, because we've had many Mormons come through, and I think that
Yeah,
history is
and so
really,
the
it's very
fact that you
interesting.
say
Yeah.
this looks
Yeah.
like a turtle
Yeah. Yeah.
is really interesting to me anyway. So, but I
Well,
just
that's
wanted to point
interesting
that
about
out.
that boat thing. Sounds very, that's fascinating. I have to do a little more, checking on that too, because I hadn't heard that though before. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
no, that was like the first group of people that came over, according to the Book of Mormon, from
Yep.
the old world, and the boats that
Wow.
they constructed were a lot like shaped a lot like turtles. And in
That's
fact,
interesting.
there's
Wow. Wow.
I believe it's the Mandan. Don't quote me on this. The Mandan tribe up in North Dakota talks about their people coming over um, in boats that were shaped like turtles as well. A
I've heard
little
the
far
Mandan. Yes.
away
Yep. Yep.
from
Yep.
there, but given the space of time and diffusion and those sorts of things, I don't think it's
Sure.
something that from a Mormon perspective you could just roll out, roll
Yeah.
past
Yeah.
without raising a little bit of an eyebrow. Interestingly
Sure.
enough,
Sure.
you were talking
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
the stone quartz. Part of that story is that God had blessed some stones, white stones, that then glowed to give light inside those turtle shaped barges.
Yeah. It sounds like a
So
quartzite stone in the watch house.
right. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
seeing some, from a Mormon perspective, and look, I'm not saying they are and I'm not saying they're not, but I am saying that there's some echoing there going on. You know what I mean? So let me go here. I won't bore you with my religion stuff here. I just
Oh,
wanted
that's
to
interesting.
point that out to
Oh,
my
that's
viewers.
oh, that's that's very interesting, David. I appreciate that, though. Definitely, we're open to all of these. That's cool about the turtle for sure. Yeah, kind of looking at what we call. We saw talked about the courtyard. That would be where the patty house at. And the courtyard is trapezoidal shape. I meant to mention the sills, the walls of the original walls built by the people, and that trapezoidal. We used to think it was kind of rectangular shape. They're wide enough that the house sat, even though the house was rectangular, it did sit over the trapezoidal shape. There's a trapezoidal shape that's kind of subtle. It is a trapezoidal shape, but the sills were so wide that it accommodated a house that's rectangular. Now we're looking at a plaza area, which is just to the west of the patio area. I was kind of looking true north. The wooden structure in the background is actually where the two cards sat that formed the astronomical center of the site until the late 1930s when Goodwin destroyed them. And we are looking true north. There are a couple chambers on either side, just out of the frame. On the right side is where the wine bottle shaped cutout is on that quarried bedrock, which sits over a drain. We think there was a structure there, but it had that wine bottle with the same groove like you showed before. In the background is basically the east-west chamber. You can see some standing slabs here. Again, those are called orthostats. That's part of the east-west chamber. And again, it's running true east and west. And that one, I think, in total was about 40 feet in length. It's when you go into the chamber today, you see a slab on the left side. You see a slab on the right side, just below the roof of that chamber, the wooden structure. In the middle, you see a lot of small stones. And when Goodwin photographed this first, when he came here in 36, and in 37, before he began his work, they actually did a Roscoe Whitney, his right-hand man, was from MIT. He was an engineer from Leominster, Mass, about an hour and a half away. He actually set up a plane table. It's a flat table on a pole, and we got pictures of him standing there with his pith helmet with a drawing implement. And what he did is he actually sketched the site very nicely too. He did cross-section, profile, and plan view of the whole site. He was doing it in different areas,
Wow.
including there's a picture of him standing in this area. But that chamber there, we're looking in the background with those two orthostats, that area in the middle is missing. And from what we know, the quarrymen actually worked just out of the frame to the left. There was where they set up what we call a boom post. There's a cutout in the bedrock with two drill holes. Actually, I think there's 3 or 4 drill holes. They made a rectangular or square cutout in the bedrock. They set the base of this pole called the boom post. It was a tall pole. It had, I assume, metal guy wires holding it in place. It was used for lifting up rocks to put on carts to haul away from this site for local building projects. That's during the time they were dismantling part of the site. And they worked from just out of the frame to the left. They did a lot of damage in that area and a lot of drill marks, and there's remains of another structure, kind of like the patty chamber, except there's only just the bottom of it left. And another structure called the compound, where 65-foot underground drains still exist, all man-made underground drains. We just did radar on that recently just to prove it was a drain. But they also got up to that east-west chamber and they stopped, fortunately, and there's drill marks all around that area. I think they started dismantling the east-west chamber, and between those two big stones standing up, one below the roof of that, yes, right there, and then the other one to the left of that, right there. In the middle, that area is hollow and it's damaged. And I think they took out some larger stones in there. And what Goodwin did is he cleaned up this whole immediate area here, and he restored that by putting smaller stones back in the hole. And he actually puts a stone that's vertical in there, a tiny little vertical. It's not that small, it looks small here. And that actually, David Stewart Smith said, that's a roof slab. He put it up vertically as the end of the chamber. When you go into the structure to the left, you might have gone into that chamber called the east-west chamber, stuck your head in there. You'll see a beautiful stone at the back. Our best knowledge is those were roof slabs. They belonged on top. The wall slab, which is another one of those vertical big slabs there, stood on its end, are now missing. They've been hauled away for building purposes, and he created a cavity. And they were destroying that chamber. And fortunately, at some point, somebody said, oh, we're done with the project, because that whole thing could be missing. That's what looks like a galley or gallery graves found in Ireland, as I mentioned, Holland, and also in France, where I saw one in France too, near Karnak, where all those 3,500 stones were stood up on end, those beautiful place. And again, it was for over there for tombs, you know. So that area is, again, the plaza area, you know, and that's where the quarrymen kind of, I think, ended their project. Unfortunately, but fortunately, they didn't get to the table and take that away, or the oracle chamber, which is good. You know, that would have been probably next.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let me move on here.
Oh, the wine bottle. There it is. We just had the wine bottle.
Yep.
That's the wine bottle one. And that one right there is the kidney-shaped one that we have. That's a cutout, as you mentioned, a libation bowl or other kind of kidney shape.
Yep.
And that's still in that plaza area. That one there's part of the compound, number 17, I think it says. That's the remains. The quarrymen worked in that area, and there's a chamber you can't see to the left. That was all you can see is the bottom of it today. There's a drill hole in it. You know they were tearing it apart. They were drilling stones to reduce their size, so that the size they have a big stone in the structure. They split it in half so they could take it away more easily, you know. And that's what you see. But that chamber is called the compound, and there's actually like a roof slab. I think they pretty much wiped the whole structure out, except what you see remaining now, just the bottom of the walls. And they're big stones too. There's actually a 65-foot.
It would have been so nice. Would have been so nice to see it before they started beating it up, so to speak.
I think it was impressive. Yeah, very impressive. Yeah, it's looking backwards now. Oh, there's the inside of the oracle chamber. Yeah, that's the north-south.
So this is the chamber where the quartz sits, right?
This is the oracle chamber. Actually, the watch house is the one with the quartz that has the alignment in it. This is the biggest chamber, however, on the main site. It's the next to the table. And you're looking to the north, and if you see in the ceiling a little light, that's where the chimney is. Yep. There were 2 stone louvers there. We have photographs of them. My dad saw them. They were there to 1959, I think, the second year we were open, and somebody stole them. So we've never seen them since. They're actually louvers to adjust the draft for perhaps a fire below.
Oh, they stole it?
Yeah, they took them. Yeah, they're gone. Yeah, and we have several pictures of them. In fact, Goodwin actually took them out of the ceiling, put them on the floor, right beyond is that your wife? I can't quite make out the picture.
Yeah, that's my wife.
Right beyond her, at the end there, probably where her neck is on the floor, if you will. That's where Goodwin took pictures of them. Then he put them back in place. That was in the 30s, and then they stayed there until about 20 years later. In 59, I think they were stolen. My dad had a report on that. It's really sad. Somebody took them away. It could have been outside of business hours. Somebody could have snuck up there. And that's looking east. That's the east part of the oracle chamber. So the oracle chamber is shaped like the letter Y if you took the roof off and look down. And this is the east wing. There's a seat on the left. You can just barely make it out. Actually, 3 people could sit on it. It's a little hard to see in the picture. Yeah, it's right where your cursor was. Yeah, right in there. And there's no metal tool markings. The whole thing is notched 90 degrees. On the right side of the picture, right where your cursor just was, that rock there was part of the rock we were just pointing at. That was one rock at one time. So either nature cracked it or these people cracked, and it weighs around 50 tons. They actually moved the rock to where it is today, or nature did that, and they built the chamber around it. So this is like a split boulder. They're huge. They split it, moved it apart, built the chamber, and there's core building in here too, because the picture doesn't really show it too much, but that ceiling up above is actually bowed in. It bows in on both sides. It's called core building. And then the roof is stepped down. And towards the east end of the structure is more closets. There are actually 5 closets, stone closets in this chamber. A lot of detail for this chamber. It's like, why would somebody go to all this trouble in making a stone bench seat, 8-foot bed, 5 closets, and 2 underground drains, one of them running 45 feet underground. And what it does is take any rainwater or snow melt and it just lets it flow out and keeps the structure dry. There's a lot of dirt in them today, as you can imagine. So we need
Right.
a lot of to get in there and clean them out. But some of these have been excavated by Goodwin and Frank Glenn going back into the 50s and 60s. And sometimes they find stone tools in them. Sometimes they find things just like wrappers from gum or something that wash into them from our visitors, modern day stuff too. But drains are a great place to look for artifacts. Sometimes they're old artifacts. So that chamber is pretty
Right.
cool. It's like if there's a priest of shaman that came up here during solstices, equinoxes, any other special events, like maybe a funeral, because those could be tombs, or maybe a wedding or something. We really don't know. We have to have a time machine, I think. But maybe they stayed in
Right.
this chamber during these events. And then when Goodwin came, the speaking tube had 2 blocks of stones concealing it. Both of those underground drains inside the chamber were blocked with stone. It's like somebody winterized the structure, they shut it down, and then they went away and never came back the last time they used it. That's what it appeared to be. It's like these things were hiding, and they actually found these things hiding behind. What I wish they had done is saved those plugs of stone that were in the drains and speaking tube and taken pictures, because we don't have it. All we have is in Goodwin's book. In all his notes, it talks about this. That was really good, but they don't have, and they took pictures of everything because Malcolm was like a professional photographer. He was an assistant to Goodwin. And then I mentioned Roscoe Whitney. Roscoe Whitney was like his foreman. That
Right.
he had a team of people up there excavating and restoring too. Yeah, so that's the Oracle Chamber, and there's some of the standing stones you can see out there, and that's a plaque with some of the alignments, but not
So this
all.
is yeah, that's that observation deck that shows all the alignments, correct?
Right.
And
Yeah, we put that
and
for 1995, 75, 1975. Yeah.
yep. And so which was really helpful when I was on there, because it
Yeah.
does lay out everything that it corresponds to, using archaeoastronomy and that sort of stuff. It gets really close there. So that was super helpful. I just wanted to bring that out. So there are some of these standing stones, and if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken, that's one of the
Yeah.
stones that is lined up with the equinox, right?
That one actually, that one's the summer solstice sunset alignment. Yeah.
So
And that
right,
one,
thank you.
yeah. Yeah. And then there is an equinox too, but the rock on the right there actually is another beautiful. Yeah, that's another beautiful monolith. That one I don't think we have determined its function. Obviously, it's significant. It's a big standing stone, and that's the way the alignment stones look for the most part, whether it's true north or whether it's the summer solstice sunset or winter solstice sunset, for instance. Some of the stones have fallen today. I would say about half of the alignment stones have fallen just from natural causes, trees falling, earthquakes, people maybe. Half are still standing. If you look at Stonehenge, some of the photographs going back before like the 1940s, you can see a lot of it has been restored today. We've been to Stonehenge several times. So that kind of thing does go on with restoration. That stone you pointed, the one that's on the right side, that one is actually tilted quite a bit from its vertical. And we're kind of worried. It is surrounded by stones helping to support it. And at the bottom of it, I'm sure, is sitting on bedrock. We're discussing right now and actually to put that thing slightly more vertical, to move it. With talking to our stonemason, who's an assistant archaeologist, and our staff and everything about that. And we think it's preventative maintenance. We're going to look at that as possibly putting it back to vertical. What we're worried about is it eventually getting to a point where it'll actually tip over. It may have taken thousands of years for this to occur, but they still do. Like Stonehenge, when you look at Stonehenge, you go to Avebury, all these ancient sites, there's a lot of restoration work. Today, they try to do preventative maintenance rather than rebuilding. But if it's a case where the stone eventually is going to go over, it gets to a certain angle and the gravity just pulls it down, or somebody says, hey, let me push that over. We don't want that either. We may actually put that stone, it's got to be put back. The top of it has to go back to the left, probably about a foot, believe it or not, It's something in discussion, and again, it's preventative maintenance. And there's one other one like that that's on the south side of the property, just outside the main site near the serpent that runs south. It's kind of close to that. and it's at a really bad angle right now, you know, and maybe 100 years, maybe 200 years, or maybe, you know, maybe in a few years, the thing could actually eventually topple over, you know. And
Right.
that's just what happens, you know. So that's a possibility. Then there's a table. There's a great view of the table. The oracle chamber is
This
what
is
you
that
see
little
behind it.
outlet structure. Yeah, this is that little
Yeah,
outlet structure I was talking about.
exactly. Yeah. So a little runnel, we call it a runnel, and there's a groove. You can see it kind of looks rectangular, but it's actually trapezoidal shape, the big groove that goes around it. The table is kind of a bell shape, sits up on four legs. When Goodwin saw it, thought it was sitting on the ground. He didn't see the legs because there was so much dirt that had accumulated around it over the centuries. Um,
Right.
and the oracle chamber is that whole thing behind it. And when you stand up where you are on the on the ramp area, you can't really tell it's a chamber there. The entrance used to have a roof over it until 1928. When you first went in, that was all under roof. We have photographs of that. Town of Salem decided in 28 to knock down the front lintel stone to block the chamber. One of the stones up near the chimney flue has metal bars under it. That slab back then was broken, and they were afraid it was going to collapse, and they knew kids played in there. They were afraid that somebody's going to die. So almost 100 years ago, the town of Salem lowered that slab in the roof, the lintel. That lintel slab, unfortunately, Dave Stewart Smith spent time trying to find it. I think he might have tried to. Back in the 80s, there was more reconstruction than there is today. Even at national parks, you've been up to a lot of these state parks, and they talk about preventative maintenance, you know, and upkeep, but they don't do as much restoration today, you know. But maybe in the 80s, we would
Right.
have put the roof back on the oracle chamber. And one thing in our favor of doing that, we have photographs inside and outside of that, how that roof once sat as you first go into the oracle chamber. And that entrance actually faces west. So there's an orientation to that the entrance. When you went out of the oracle chamber, by the way, you went through a stone staircase. There was actually, that was
Yep.
just that was a small window there. Kids climbing into that structure still after the entrance was blocked made that window bigger, I guess, and natural erosion caused it to get bigger. By 58, when my dad opened it to the public, he just modified and cleaned it a little bit more and put a wooden staircase in there that stayed there to about 1982. And David Stewart Smith pulled out the staircase, excavated. I think he found a couple of hammerstones, and he built that staircase. And it was part of this ocean thing. People were hitting their head on the stone, which was a lintel of a window, they're banging their head on it. So we made it a little bit better for our visitors. So that only had one way in, one way out, and it had two windows, one from the 8-foot bed inside the chamber, and one which is the exit today. And it's a window that was facing kind of south. But the table is orientated true east and west, a bell shape again. That little runnel you mentioned there, you can see the water. Looks like it might have. You can see a little stain there, right below it. That's where on the table itself. But where you're pointing at actually is yeah, right there. That notch in the bedrock's intentional too. Somebody actually took stone out of there. There's no drill marks. It was done somehow, and that's where the fluid, whatever it is, goes into that cutout. Some people suggest they put a stone base like in there, or a terracotta, you know, like a clay base, or even a wooden one to collect the fluid, you know. But that maybe they
Right.
didn't. Maybe they just go into the rock and it stayed on the rock there, whatever it was. So that table actually came from beneath that wooden platform where the astronomical center is. Whoever carved it took it out of the bedrock. You can see the same shape in the bedrock today. They moved it 40 feet and they set it up on the four legs. And that there picture is to the west. Oh, we're back at the table. Yep. So so that table is about 40 feet from where its quarried socket is. And you're looking at, I think this is one of the walls. We did an excavation along that wall further down the wall back in July. Uh, my assistant archaeologist who worked with David Stewart Smith and Pat Hume, Pete, myself, and our manager, who's actually getting his graduate work in history and archaeology now, and he's been with us for 6 years. He's working with a New Hampshire state archaeologist on a couple projects this year, last year at the state laboratory. So he's been immersing himself into archaeology. So we did a dig out there looking for the two stones from a pentagonal shaped window this summer. The pentagonal
Right.
window was photographed in 70. The last photographs we had of it, I found them 5 years ago. It was just one slide in an envelope. My dad wrote on it, sighting portal, looking at the winter solstice sunset. I saw it. I'm like, what the heck is this? I don't know of any window. This is in 2020. We already found a few other windows. I don't know of any window that looks like this out there. I put this slide aside. I lost it for 5 years. I found it in March, and well, I actually found where it was. It's amazing. But I showed a couple of different. That's the eye stone that kind of looks like a gourd right
Yeah,
there.
this
Yeah,
is
that's
this is the last thing I wanted to show here, and then we'll kind of
sure,
wrap up.
sure, yeah.
So this here is fascinating to me because this is an eye that would be reminiscent of an eye that you would see depicted either in a hieroglyph or something that you would see coming out of like Mesopotamia somewhere, right?
Yeah,
This is a representation of an eye. Is that correct?
that's right. Yeah, that's Barry Fell. I think is the one that uh, basically interpreted it as an eye in the eye of Baal. The eye of Baal in the Bible. There's Baal. Baal is, or yeah, Baal, Baal is in the Bible, is a Phoenician god. And he thought like the eye of Horus, which I think you said, you might have meant hieroglyphics, like the Egyptians have the eye of Horus. The eye, even on our dollar bills with a pyramid, has the eye too, the all-seeing eye, knowledge. I think there's a lot of symbology with that. And what that is supposed to be the eye with the, almost like where the tear duct is. And if that was the only one, there's one other one like that on the hilltop, and I can never find it, that Barry Fell saw 50 years ago. But in his book, America BC, which came out in 76, the first of his 3 books he put out, it talks a lot about Vermont. Vermont is absolutely loaded not only with structures, but it's loaded with inscriptions. I think it has the most inscriptions of anywhere in New England, and perhaps the whole Northeast. There's more of these. I'm trying to think which structure. I'm not sure about Woodstock Calendar 2, but there are in his book the location and photographs, and you'll see that repeated. So you say, well, that's just a coincidence. It's something natural, not man-made or whatever. And you see the same thing repeated up in Vermont, And then there's others, I think, in New York. I'm going to say in Massachusetts, maybe out in the Berkshires. But if you go to his book, America BC, you can find, he has a whole chapter on those, I think. We're in chapter 7, I think, about our site. And the other chapter is about everything else around the Northeast. But this is repeated at other places, particularly up in Vermont. He says it's the eye of Baal. Baal being the sun god, I guess.
And here's the thing, right? As a land surveyor, and that's what I've done for the last 30 years, I can tell you there's no way this shape is naturally occurring, right? There is
Yeah, they didn't
too
think
much
so either.
precision. Nature
Yeah,
abhors straight lines. That's an awfully straight line. And then to have a perfect belly in 2 places, right?
right.
This
Yeah,
is definitely
yeah,
man-made. There is no
yeah.
way that is anything else other than that. And when I saw that, I was I was kind of really shocked. And you're right. I did see a couple other places where there was something very similar to this at different parts in throughout the site itself. So, Dennis, you've been super gracious with your time. We're going on 2.5 hours now.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I do want to ask a couple more questions here. And I would be remiss if I didn't follow up with this. When you and I were first meeting and I was talking to you about coming on the podcast and I had mentioned that I was Mormon, you had said that there is a site similar to this one up in Sharon, Vermont on Joseph Smith's birthplace. Is that correct? Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, that would be correct. It's up in yeah, it's up where Joseph Smith's birthplace is correct. Yeah, and it's actually on property adjacent to it. And we visited the facility. The facility is beautiful up there. It's and they have guided tours inside the building and everything. And I was going to ask one of the guides if he knew how to get to this particular Calendar 1 site, which is next door. And they were so busy, I didn't want to, I didn't want to take too much of his time. And they were very, very nice. But yeah, this is Lake Sharon. I'm trying to think if there's another name of the town that's right there too. It begins with an R, but not Royal. Is it Royalton? South Royalton, I think. It was called Elephantine Valley, I think. And back when Byron Dix worked on it, he was a Vermonter and researcher. Remember my dad's group? He was an astronomer, and he worked for a company shooting satellites into space using Canon. He worked over in the Canadian border, and that was an interesting thing by itself because he the guy that ran the whole company ended up on 60 Minutes. He mysteriously died, and there was a whole controversy. So it got on CBS 60 Minutes about his boss that ran the company. So Byron ended up, the company folded up. I guess he moved to Massachusetts and worked for the Air Force Research Center down in Hanscom, Bedford, Massachusetts. And the really, really smart guy, Byron, wrote the book called the book is called Manitou with James Mayberg Jr. And he's another interesting guy. He dug at Akatiri over in the Mediterranean. I think that was where Santorini was. But he was also an engineer from MIT. We have a number of those guys like Roscoe Whitney. And he's the guy that actually developed the deep sea submersible Elvin that's just getting retired since 1964 when he developed it. So he was one of the chief engineers on that. He's an archaeologist. He was an engineer, and they wrote the book Manitou. You read Manitou, you'll see a lot of what you're talking about. And Calendar One is right near Joseph Smith. They talk about Joseph Smith. And when I was flying out of Vermont, in my early days back in 81 through 83, I did fire patrol too, besides flying in the Twin Otters, passengers and stuff, for a company called Precision Airlines. And I did fire patrol, and I go right over Joseph Smith's that whole estate. You can see it from the air. It's beautiful. And that's right where that chamber is. It's right next door. The thought is that Joseph Smith may have even played in the structure. If you ever come across anything about that, please let us know. I don't know what sources that is, but it was talked about quite a bit because Joseph Smith was right there. The chamber's there. And that structure is astronomically aligned. And I think the hills around there have structures. So it's like in a bowl, if I'm not mistaken. And you're in the middle of the bowl with a chamber and you're looking out. And back in those days, the whole area was clear of trees. Today, it's, I guess, all forested in the last 50 years, so it's hard to see anything. But Byron took pictures. It ends up in his book. It ends up in Barry Fell's book because, I mean, they all knew each other. Barry Fell went there. It's an amazing site. So, yes, right next to Joseph Smith's property is a Calendar One site. I think that was named after by Byron Dix. And Calendar Two site, which is also famous, is in South Woodstock, Vermont. You know, I think we've been to both of those areas just recently. So yes, yeah, there is the Joseph Smith thing going on there, and it'll be interesting to find out if there's anything anywhere that he mentions his structure, maybe playing in it as a youth. I mean, I would as a kid for sure. You know, I mean that's what kids do. You know.
Absolutely. I'll check.
Yeah.
I'll check with a
Yeah.
couple of guys I
Yeah.
know that kind
Maybe you
of
know.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
check with a couple guys I know that
Yeah.
kind of do
Yeah.
this for like that's the only thing they do is look at the
Really. Wow.
history and look at some sites. And I'll one of them's Rod Meldrum and the other is I'll reach out to Wayne May and see if they have any information on that
Oh, Wayne May.
Calendar
Sure. Yeah.
One site.
Oh, Wayne May. I'm familiar with him. Yeah, he writes Ancient American.
Yep. Yep.
Magazine. Right. Yeah. My public. Yeah, we've been in that magazine over the years, and my publicist has done some articles for him too. But yeah, that Joseph Smith thing's very interesting to us. And next time we get up that way, we're up there this summer. We did some other stuff, and I said we just didn't have time to quite do that. But I want to go back and pursue that again to see if I can see the chamber finally and see the area. But again, I think it's really forested in since Byron Dix did a lot of the work back in 73, 74, 75. And he was one of our, he was one of the big parts of our because he was a astronomer. He made his own telescopes, and he actually came down and did his own separate study of our astronomical alignments. We had Beverly Pearson Associates, a survey company, do their study on our site. And then my uncle Oz, and I was part of his team, we did our own separate thing. And by 77, we all compiled the data. We made maps, and my dad wanted to have it all ready for around the end of 77, maybe December. And he had everybody gather, and they took all the maps, and all the maps came out the same. So he wanted to make sure that the data was correct and everybody was getting the same information, and then it all agreed. You know, there was no like, I got this is different than yours. It was perfect. That's when they submitted it to the Harvard Smithsonian for astrobiology. So Byron Dix is a big part of that. But here was really, if you get involved with Joseph Smith and Calendar One particularly, you'll see Byron Dix's name come up. It's D-I-X, Byron Dix. And he passed away, I think, at 46 years old, probably in the late 90s, I think, unfortunately. He died way before his time, you know. He was really, really heavily involved with this stuff.
Yeah. No, totally. Last question. I'm gonna let you go here. So what we have here is we have a site that's been dated pretty confidently to 4,000 years ago. We seem to have markings that are definitely pointing towards a geographical region. We have an entire complex, not just one or two things here, and it's one of many throughout New England.
Mhm.
As you've been on this thing essentially your whole life, if someone was to ask you what this site was used for, the one that you work on, what do you think it is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a ancient ceremonial site. I think people gathered here, perhaps even people coming in like a pilgrimage to this particular site because it's so big. It's the kind of the highest concentration of structures, and it really has like a center to it, the main site, versus other sites that have a lot of chambers scattered all over the landscape. So I think it's a ceremonial site. It's really astronomically aligned. I'm sure that they tied that into their religion. It was just like there's no separation in that. And they came here and they celebrated longest day, shortest day of the year, the mid-season, also the cross-quarter days, and then it gets into the star, alignments, which adds a little more confusion. Why were they watching the stars? But stars like constellations like the Pleiades were actually bookends on growing season if they were doing any type of agriculture, migrations of animals and stuff. But I think it was a gathering place, and it does have chambers that look like they were burials. So ceremonial place, a burial place, and then an astronomically aligned place. But again, I don't think it's a village where people live. They probably live close by in wood hider bark, structures that they decompose after a few dozen years. And that's something we hope to discover someday. But I think it was one of the biggest, of the ceremonial places throughout the whole Northeast. It just seems unique in that way. It's got so much on this hill. And everything on our hill you can find all over the Northeast, the structures, the shapes, the sizes, the styles. It's kind of a reflection of what's over the whole, going from Canada all the way down to about Virginia. So, but I don't know if that's the answer, but that's where we're kind of at today, with all the information and what we know about the site.
Well, man, I'll tell you what, this was fun, and you have a standing invitation to come back on anytime. Because as you make new discoveries, I want to hear about them, bro.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're working with an astronomer right now. As a matter of fact, I'll go back to the museum today. We're working on all the LiDAR that we took last year, different LiDAR, because he's interested in, he's retired from the University of Arizona. He reached out to us last spring, and he's working on some other projects. He's back in Texas living, and I'm having him talk to a surveyor from the 1970s, Charlie Pearson. I have him in communication. And now I have the LiDAR gentleman from a company called GPI, that's from Maine to Florida, who did all the entire hill with his drone last year, like a $90,000 unit, and he can see down to about a centimeter with that. And he may have to come back and do a little bit more work to have the precision. So our astronomer down in Texas wants to actually start at the beginning of our research again with the solar, then the lunar, and then the astronomical alignments. He's done stuff up in Canada near Oak Island. He's done stuff on the Newport Tower. And he's done a lot of famous sites around the world, but he's retired and he just wants to do this now, I think, for enjoyment, in his retirement years. So we may have some stuff coming out pretty soon about that. And we have a carbon dating right now we're waiting on one of our artifacts. It's in Miami at Beta Laboratories. And we should be hearing news on that soon, too. So if anything develops with that, I certainly will send you a note on that, too.
Perfect. Well, Dennis, this was fun. I appreciate it, man. Anything else you want to say before we drop off here?
Oh, thank you so much. I enjoyed meeting you and your wife. And coming up on a winter solstice pretty soon. We're open for the winter solstice. We're open year round. The only days we close are Christmas and Thanksgiving, and the occasional northeast snowstorm blizzard that we get up here. And we do snowstorming in the winter, and that's kind of cool because we open up the entire 106 acres. When you visited us, you probably saw roughly 16 acres to the 106 acres. So we open up, and that's where serpent walls are, windows and quarries. So a lot out there to see, but we kind of restricted to 16 acres during the normal months, So that's coming up soon, as we get a little bit of snow up here, which is probably coming pretty quickly. Yeah. Well, thank you, Dave, so much.
No, thank you. Hang out for just 5 minutes, all right?
I will, Dave. Thank you, and thank your audience very much. And you can go to StonehengeUSA.com if they want to check us out.
All right, will do. I'll put the link in the episode show notes. All right, bud?
Thank you so much, Dave. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, bye, everybody.
Listening to the Mormon Renegade Podcast.